Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. July 29th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. A lot of follow-ups from yesterday's show, especially around Venezuela, that I find it really interesting how this is tying into a lot of different things. But we're going to start today with the talk around the same kind of thing we've been kind of, what I see kind of strung along a lot of these topics right now around the two-party illusion, the aggressive aiming at the right in regard to decades-long agendas, really, but largely coming through the COVID-19 agenda, the Great Reset conversation, at least as I kind of see it, the same things, the digital ID, the things that we had seen historically the right being most resistant to. And now seeing a lot of these begin to develop behind the scenes of agendas that are being presented as completely something else, aimed at cancel culture or fighting the woke left or whatever else. And I, in my opinion, tricking people on the right, conservatives, into believing that they're fighting for something else. And I'm going to start with a point around this that I think is really important, that highlights, it's using a clip from Alex Jones, but it's not really necessarily about Alex, other than I see him as a part of this larger concept. And it's just the partisanship and the way that and it could be not necessarily nefarious, that people are arguing from what they believe is the truth, or what they see as what's correct. You know, our side is right. We're all fighting for the right things. Therefore, when we do this, that means we're doing it from a good place, and they're doing it over there to deceive you. But when you back away from it, they're both literally doing the same thing. They're just saying, no, it's this, no, it's that, and then acting like they have some kind of moral superiority. And maybe you think that. Maybe that's the case. But I think it's very alarming to see how much of this is taking up the conversation, and a lot of good people are falling prey to it and falling for, I guess, the best thing really to say, and this is what I've been calling it for a long time, and I'm not the one that even coined this, but team sport politics, where you are essentially choosing a side that doesn't really come down to really what's even best for you in the long run. It's really, and that's how it's, you usually make it make sense, but it's really about fighting for a win, to say that we beat the other side. And that's what a lot of this comes down to. And a lot of people within it are only about that, trying to benefit themselves through it on top of all of that. So we're going to start with this point, which then comes into a discussion around Twitter and verification, something that I was actually surprised to find out. And it only happened because of this really ridiculous troll that's pretending to be me on Twitter. And I was going to kind of flag Twitter's attention to it and realized that they were asking me to verify through AU10TIX, the Israeli Unit 8200 intelligence-based verification system that, as I understand it, works with a vast majority of Israeli intelligence that has nothing to do with the verification platform. A very alarming thing, something Censored Man did a great job calling out, really pushing. I think that's largely why Elon at least claimed to stop it. Now, maybe it will stop later, but I think it's an important point to make, unless I'm missing something, that this is still being used. And we're still being forced to check, boxes that say, I confirm this is okay. There's a whole legal process there that wouldn't just lazily be left as some kind of mistake or discrepancy. If they're claiming Stripe is the one, then that means there's not a legal document being signed for Stripe allowances. There's a whole legal element to this. So with this being there, that shows me that this is still being used right now, despite what Elon put out publicly, which I think is very interesting. And it lines up with a lot of other stuff. But we're also going to talk about Venezuela, a large bulk of the conversation today. A lot of this weirdly, and I think overlapping with Twitter is what I was going to say, and Elon Musk, but I think there's much more to that. And it's not just these couple of topics. Like, it's this same kind of developing, I don't even want to say leadership, but just kind of this power structure that's not necessarily rooted in some kind of executive branch or administration. But I think it's really like, what it is, put it this way, it's technocracy showing its face. We've seen this in the past where, like, Obama and Citigroup and these different points where you can clearly see, which there's usually way more than just one kind of central entity, but a group that seems to have been largely behind the lobbying and influencing of the outcome. And we've talked for a long time about how this is more of a political front to, people behind the scenes that are, whether other countries or other power structures or religion, whatever you think it is, that are really driving things. And I think we've seen, as Matt Ehret done a lot of good work calling out, this sort of this time where the people that have always sort of been behind the scenes, that chose to kind of fall back and allow you to think you've been voting and putting people in place, are now suddenly going, okay, we're kind of done with that. We're going to step back out into the light. And that's the the World Economic Forum, the idea of globalization, the idea of public-private partnerships, and all of this is meant to drive them back into the front as the actual leaders. And I think we're seeing this, and these are all theories, but I think there's a lot, I think this is very valid. We're now seeing the Vance and Elon, Peter Thiel, and all these entities sort of stepping out as driving a lot more than just the presidential election conversation. And I know a lot of people feel that. I know a lot of people are resistant to call it out because of partisanship. And that's one of the biggest problems. But the Venezuela conversation, back to the point, weirdly ties back around to all these same kind of things, whether that's just because of war, regime change, but specifically Elon Musk playing a role, sort of beginning this digital coup around Venezuela for the however many times we've seen the US government try to coup Venezuela, and driving this whole push right now of people that are screaming and clamoring for some kind of action to, I guess, put the person they want in place because that's democracy. It's really interesting. Now, we're also going to talk about a really disgusting story coming out of Israel from the said Tayaman torture camp, essentially. And this is not even a hyperbolic term. It's been verifiably stated. It's been acknowledged by the leadership. It's been discounted as that's not even a problem, that they can do whatever they want, publicly stated by people like the Smotrich and Ben-Gvirs of the conversation. And now we're going to talk about a really disgusting addition to this story, not just the previous developments around evidence showing them using metal, iron, hot pokers up people's anuses, or torture or rape, or all sorts of things we've heard, then proven by human rights groups and testimony and insiders. There's a discussion now that just happened of the same location of Palestinian detainees. And I'm going to show you, as we all know, most of which aren't even being charged, most of which aren't even criminals, they were in this prison, they were being accused of something. Military, along with leadership and supported by levels of the leadership, broke into this area and gang raped women and men that are being held in custody. Then, after they were detained, the leadership came back with another mob and basically forced their way in some cases, and are protesting that they be released, calling some of these rapists heroes. There's no way to misunderstand this story. This is not every Israeli, not every Jew, but 100% the leadership of this coalition and largely the Israeli government. It is the Zionist influence on the people of this country and the government we're talking about. I just don't know how many more ways we can make this obvious. I think, again, it's just down to people who just don't want to see it. And those people you'll never really reach. Now, we're going to get into a lot of other things as well, a lot of stuff around this that I think are very important to cover, but we'll leave it there for now. Let's start with the main point. Actually, that's not where I'm starting over here, that I'm going to start with anyway, which I think is interesting around this Zero Hedge article. CIA denies Trump shooter was subject of MKUltra program. This is just a funny way to start this, really, but it is interesting, and it's just showing you my opinion, which is that, as always, the two-party illusion, the paradigm is being driven by just subjective, assumptive, just team sport politics. And what's interesting about this, and I actually do have one thing that got very at the last second that I think Orwell shared with me around a video from the Trump conversation. There's a couple of follow-ups from yesterday's show. Very briefly, I'll show you after this. But this is so interesting to me, one, because obviously there's a lot of question around this kid, around what happened there. And still to this very moment, just unbelievable amount of inconsistencies around this story. Watch our last show and many before it to get more into that if you'd like. But there's a conversation, obviously, that anybody should ask is whether this person is influenced in some way or all the way to the level of an MKUltra program. If you don't know what that is, people tend to call it some mind control. The whole program was a hell of a lot more than just that. Horrifying. Speaking of rape and all sorts of actions like that, there was sexual overlaps, experimentation, horrifying stuff your government's done and still does to you all the time that we find out 10, 20 years later. The point is that obviously this could be something that's wrapped in with this. And I've talked about this before, that the documents show that despite their statements, it went on well past when they said it ended in the 70s. Now, the point is that it's clear, you can see it kind of got scattered in multiple programs. And obviously this stuff is still happening in different ways. This is not hard to show, but the actual name, you guys can decide for yourself whether that program was stopped. I think it's pretty easy to show that it did not. But that aside, the point was that people in the right started having this conversation, which of course, this is important to bring up. Let's discuss whether this is possible. Yes, obviously. Okay, let's discuss the evidence we have, which appears to be pretty much nothing. Doesn't mean it's not the case. What evidence shows he was part of this program? What evidence shows that this was something that we should continue to make a central part of this conversation? As far as I can tell, not much. So that's where you would normally leave it. Okay, well, it's interesting. Clearly, there's some anomalies in this that make you wonder whether this is part of that program. You put it aside and we come back. That's what we would do. That's what any objective researcher would do. Now, as usual in the partisanship, it took over a huge part of this conversation. People are interviewing people that were part of this, but that's always interesting. But in the sense that it's developing this story, which that's the point I make about assumption on top of assumption, and then narratives are built based on things that didn't even happen. But this all comes back to the point I'm making, where the CIA stood up and said he wasn't part of that program. Which just, I can't help but laugh. Now, of course, could that mean that this is the way of them making you think it's, we deny it? Sure, they could be denying it because that's actually the case. But think about the stupidity of how that actually the way this is going down. I mean, of course, you could argue that they would do that, knowing that we would then think that's the case, or knowing that someone like me would come out and say they wouldn't do it if they did, whatever, 4D chess or whatever you want to call it. Of course, they could, and that's what the reality is. They tend to think very far ahead. It's the point I always make about just because they deny it doesn't mean it's true, or just because the media says it doesn't mean the opposite is true. It often a good point to start. But if we can't think at this point that they've already thought that far ahead to go, hey, if we come out and say that's not true, they'll probably think the opposite. I'm pretty sure they can think past that. So my point in saying all of this is it's funny to me that this comes out and you get what you might expect. Pretty much all the conversation from pretty high-level accounts as well, going, so that's what happened. So this is the case. We knew it. MKUltra was part of this. Like the same kind of things you'd expect, which again, possibly, sure. And so all the point I'm making here, Gizmodo says the CIA denies conspiracy theory that it used MKUltra on the shooter. I said, so the right says the left are easy to troll. It's really that the two-party illusion is easy to troll. It's the same point we're making about cancel culture, wokeism, whatever. They're the same thing with different versions, different flavors of the same program, the same illusion, the same subjective, assumptive process. Not conservatives and liberals. That exists and there's an overlap, but I'm talking about the team sport politics, Democrat, Republican. That's not even close to the majority of the conversation, even with conservatives and liberals. Remember, the largest voting bloc of every election are people that do not partake. The largest voting bloc within the ones that do always register as independent. But let's keep pretending like this is the biggest conversation. Anyway, the point is, I wrote, here's the right being trolled by the CIA, because that's what I think this is. Whether it's the truth or not, they came out and said that so you would fall into that. Go, oh my God, they say they called it out. They said it's not, therefore it has to be. It, to me, is most likely the case that they're just making this happen. They're saying that because that's the reaction. The program is very real, to reiterate, and likely never ended. That's my opinion. But at best, this is conjecture at the moment, which I think is that's why this happened. But as, of course, any right, for those of the podcast where it's, one lowercase, one uppercase kind of writing, I put, but saying no means yes. Very simplistic thinking. So if my point in starting with this is to show you that it's not just one side or the other. It's not that the right is the sane one and the left is the stupid ones, or vice versa, or however you want to frame this from your partisan perspective. If you're trapped in the two-party illusion, I'm hoping that you will begin to recognize that you're all being played in very selective ways that lead ultimately to the same point, for the government. That is always what this is about. Not one side or the left, but the government, because that's what we're actually dealing with. The Americans, the people, and the government. And they love to make you think that they're scattered and split and you're fighting for one side versus the other. The inside, the white hats. Yes, those things do exist in some level, but the overarching point is that the government uses these things to make you think you're fighting your neighbor as opposed to them. And it doesn't have to be fighting if you don't want to look at it that way, but resisting, checking, questioning, pushing back, speaking truth to power. Not to your neighbor, which is what they want you to do, screaming at them about what you think happened, but to them, all of them together. So on the note of the left or the right and being trolled in the same way, I want to get into this video. And this goes back to the thing I was just talking about yesterday. The video of I'm a Christian or I'm not a Christian or whatever. What was the point that I made? Do you remember? I thought it was interesting. And I'm not coming from a left-right perspective as this video, as typical from a partisan perspective, especially someone like him, it gets framed as that's all or nothing. If they're doing this, they're a Democrat and they're doing it because of this. Well, I'm not either. I wasn't wrapped up in this tweet like it was some bombshell point. I just thought it was interesting. Sounds like he says kind of a weird middle ground. He could have said, I'm a Christian or I'm not Christian. He could have said either one. Frankly, it doesn't really matter that much to me. I think we know about his history and what he's written and so on. That's for you to look into. I simply ended with saying, well, we don't know. And nobody does. Only Trump truly knows what he said. That's where that has to end. And on top of that, I thought it was even more interesting about what he said on top of that, which, you don't have to vote again. We'll fix it. And of course, he could mean any number of things. Trump says nonsense all the time. And maybe he said it just to troll you, right? All these things are possible. Anybody saying they know for sure is simply telling you what they want you to think, just like you're about to hear. And what I find really interesting about this, and again, it's not just him, it's the cult partisanship and the left doing the same thing in reverse, and it's all over the place. What I'm going to show you here is the two-sided game of this all. He's going to tell you about this discussion around something that's used psychologically to make you think something that's not the reality. And what I want you to think about is the fact that that's literally what he goes on to do. Now, maybe he just believes he's in the right, that he's actually just forcefully, repeatedly replaying the thing he wants, the truth. Or he's doing exactly what he's saying they're doing in reverse, which is telling you what you're supposed to hear and then making sure you hear it. Now, maybe both sides aren't coming from a nefarious place. Maybe both sides just think the thing they think. There's always an overlap. But if you get trapped into that mindset that it's all that they're trying to deceive you and the one side's good and the other side's bad, you will never fall back. You will get lost in that. And that's the whole point. I'll read you what Coronavirus Plushie said in a minute because they make a good point about this. So let's take a look at this clip.
Auditory pareidolia is a known psychological event that happens where if people are told what they're hearing, they will then believe that what they hear is actually what they were told.
And that's very valid. That doesn't necessarily mean that's always what we're seeing. Sometimes people just say what they think, and that ends up doing the same thing. But you see, the game becomes that that's what they're doing because what he said is he's a Christian because we know. Well, we can't. You could say that's what he said before. Sure. I can also show you things going back before he was running for president where he said something very different. And of course, maybe he changed his mind. And see, that's what an objective perspective looks like, where we end up going, yeah, well, only he really knows. But that's not what you're going to get.
Gaslighting, it's Stockholm Syndrome, it's brainwashing.
All right.
And then he plays this clip from like a TV show, which is, it kind of goes over and makes the point about this. But I find it odd that you wouldn't play something like clinical, like a real discussion about what this might be. All it does is it's just to save time. He plays this clip that says, this is embarrassing, or that's what he tells them it is. And you hear it, and that is what you hear. And then he goes on to tell you to listen for something else with the same audio clip. And then it kind of sounds like that too. It's like that, what's that thing we saw going around where it was like Laurel or whatever it was, right? And you heard what you kind of, that's the same kind of point, right? So that's all this really is. He goes over this clip, but this is that actor, right? That actor's, you can see him if you stop and watch it. So just, it takes a long, that's why it's not worth. If you want to listen to it, go ahead, but you get the point. It's basically suggestive, which is the power of suggestion. It works pretty, powerfully.
Our reality.
So I saw the headline all over the news, being pushed everywhere. President Trump said, I'm not a Christian. So I go to the video that the Democrat Party's posting everywhere, and he clearly says, and I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. And
just listen to this rationalization, right? Because clearly the way he says it is pretty weird, which is what I pointed out. I'm a Christian or not Christian. However, it's weird. It's a weird inflection, which is the only thing we can really point out. Trump's weird. Maybe he just said it funny. But to try to just dismiss the one side as crazy, but you're the only, the point is it's right in the middle. And that's the reality of it.
It's barely distorted. He's talking fast. He's got a New York accent, but
I don't think he's got a New York accent, but that's just me.
He's clearly saying, he said he's a Christian for decades. He's said, I need God to protect me. America needs God.
Yeah, and a politician say a lot of things. And for decades, I don't believe that's the reality, but also it's something that he has shown himself to be, a deceiver, like all of them. That's not a partisan thing. I think Biden is just as ridiculous. I think Obama is just as ridiculous. They lie. It's what they do. People in these positions, whether presidents or politicians or not, Trump has written about how he deceives people for business and for other things. So that's just it, and he's proud of it. Maybe you should be. That's up for you to decide. I disagree. I think it's dishonest. But at the end of the day, It's not hard to wrap your mind around that he might say, what he might want you to think to benefit himself. Sort of like how he rattled off a bunch of really dumb things at the Bitcoin conference that I was watching and I laughed about along with everybody else in the room, that it was really ridiculous for him to say things that you could tell he didn't even really understand. That's what we're talking about. So maybe saying I'm a Christian or the reverse is just what is my point the other day was that I don't know why in the world he would come out and say I'm not a Christian. That doesn't make sense to me. That's the logical point, right? But that still doesn't know for sure what happened.
We're in a fight between good versus evil, but here they are telling you desperately, like they said J.D. Vance wrote in his best-selling book that he had sex with his couch. There's nothing about a couch in the book.
Who cares? This is the stupidest kind of stuff. This is what is meant to pull you away. Who cares about that? What if he did? Who cares? Why does that even matter with anything? Whether there was even no big stories in the world going on. That's what we care about. It's all about character assassination. And that's a dumb thing anyway. But see, this is the kind of thing you get engaged with in all this stuff, with the partisanship.
But they let it run for 4 or 5 days. And then AP and Reuters said it's fake.
Yep. Just like all sides of the media do all the time. Just like most of the mainstream alternative media do all the time. You know that. We've talked about this over and over. I've seen Alex Jones and InfoWars do it countless times. But, it's all about projection. It's about making them the boogeyman. They're the bad in the good-evil dynamic.
But it's already too late. It's out there that J.D. Vance is having sex with his couch.
That's just so
Remember how they said Trump hates all Mexicans, never said anything close to it? So there's a lot of good people coming across the border. Also a lot of really bad hombres.
And for that point, yeah, I agree. They misrepresented him like they do all the time. But he also does have some statements that are very clearly leaning towards that he has a negative view of a certain demographic. But I'll agree, there's plenty of things he said that go the other direction. Maybe just because he says what people want to hear all the time. I don't think anybody truly knows what people like this think or are. But this is what's beneficial to what they're trying to accomplish.
Is that all Mexicans are bad? No, he said a lot of bad hombres are also coming across. So this is how they do it. They put their lie out first. As the great Mark Twain said, a lie goes halfway around the world before truth puts its pants on.
Boots on.
But in the end, truth wins. They are so desperate, and I can't even imagine what they're going to do next. I mean, we already heard.
And actually, I don't think the truth at the end, the truth wins is not part of that quote. By the way, it's actually the opposite. Was I think the suggestion that's usually not how that works out, but that's my opinion.
Kamala Harris was never the border czar, even that's her official title. Thousands of newscast stories.
Again, what a meaningless story. Like, yes, it matters for showing that they're lying, but my point is, who doesn't think the corporate media lies? Those stories are designed to make you start thinking only one part of it lies, where the other one's trying to correct the record. I mean, it takes a special kind of naivety to think that that's what's going on. With how long you can look back at whatever it is, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, or even go OAN, or whatever the other underling, whatever left and right or the mainstream alternative media are. That's what always happens.
We heard she never bailed out rioters, even though she's all over TV bragging about it years ago. This is their desperation level. And so instead of dialing lies back because they've been caught, they're dialing lies up. So here is the official clip of Trump speaking at Turning Point Action yesterday. And here he says, I need Christians to vote. I'm a Christian. And they're also spinning it. Oh, he said, you only got to vote this time. You won't have to vote in the future. Well,
and that's the point that I think is actually more interesting. And I challenge you to tell me what he says actually lines up with this. At the end of the day, what he says is a very perplexing statement about how you won't have to vote again. Now, ask yourself, if it's just implying you for 4 years, why would anybody say that? Everybody knows that. And you wouldn't say, do it now, you have to vote again. Well, that's just saying go vote. And you won't have to vote for 4 years. The way he says it is odd. Now, again, I'm not going to jump to conclusions. He could say it just to get you riled up. My first thought was he said it to kind of troll the left, to get them to go, oh my God, look, he said the thing we keep saying. Right? I mean, it's just a bunch of statements. He's lied about half of what he said running for, what about lock her up and the Fed and whatever else. But what he says is obvious. It's a weird, anomalous statement about fixing it. You want to vote again. You listen, I've showed it for you. I've played it for you. But what he describes it as is straight up not even remotely what he's actually saying or suggesting. So I find that odd. Lying for your truth, trying to hide the statement because it's uncomfortable. I don't know, but I find it interesting.
He's a dictator. No, he's clearly, because I know Trump speak, he's clearly saying we're going to win and turn the country around so good, we'll be so popular, we won't be such a crisis. But now,
he knows Trump speak, right? So he knows. He let him interpret for you what his meaning was. That we will do so well that we won't have a crisis. Well, listen to what he says, and you tell me how that even comes close to lining up with what he said. I'm leaning more towards he's just trying to troll people, Trump.
Now is the time. But they're not focusing on that part as much as they're focusing on the false claim that he says, I'm not a Christian. He says, and I'm a Christian, and I'm a Christian. Here it is in regular speed and then slowed down.
And again, Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians.
That's the first part. Now, you just pretend, now try to overlap that with, we'll do so well, there won't be chaos. That's what he says that means. That's Trump speak that Alex tells you that means. Now, again, I find this to be largely unimportant with what the rest we're going to talk about, but this is important for the building story around how the dynamic, the paradigm is pulling people in to the ideologue aspect of this. And the idea is clearly that he is saying things that are the exact opposite, or it's sort of like the Orwellian aspect, or as some people would call the Alice in Wonderland part of this, where it's just meant to be manipulative and confusing and nothing makes sense. So you just don't know what to believe. It makes you uncomfortable and unhappy. And usually you just check out and let things happen the way they're going. So that could be a whole part of this here. But I think it's interesting because that doesn't say anything other than you won't have to vote again. We'll get it fixed. And of course, you could mean whatever you wanted to mean, but that's not even remotely what they're framing it as.
I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian.
And that the party slows down right there. Now, it's nah, I'm not Christian or a Christian. Of course, it could go either way. That's what anybody objective would say. It's very weird. It's right in the middle. It's a weird way to say either of them.
It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian.
And he shakes his head. He literally shakes his head no. That's what the first people showed me when I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. I just don't know why he would ever say that.
I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian.
You can hear either. That goes back to what, so this is exactly what he did in the beginning. What he was saying they were doing, how is this not the exact same thing? Well, because he's on the right side, like as in the good side, right? I mean, just be objective and look at it. He's going, this is what you're supposed to hear. This is what he says. Listen to it over and over. He may mean it, but it's the same thing. They're all the same thing. The two-party illusion is the same thing.
Christian, I'm a Christian.
You can really hear either. I'm not Christian, Christian.
I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
How do you explain that with what he was in 4 more years? So after we vote now, you won't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed. Again, I don't want to dwell on this, but how the hell you pretend that doesn't mean exactly what those words mean? Oh, it means he'll do well, no chaos. I just think that's pretty crazy.
This guy was born in New York City. He talks like a New Yorker. I'm a Christian. You know, I'm a Christian.
Not even remotely. Am I crazy? That's just that's not even close.
He tries to cut his New York accent for the general public, but he's a New Yorker. Yeah, I'm a Christian. Yeah, I'm a Christian.
That doesn't even sound like a New York accent to me.
But they sit there and didn't tell you that he said, I'm not a Christian.
Now, most of us simply said this is an interesting statement. It seems like he might have said that, right? A lot of people did forcefully state it, but I think most of them are in the paradigm.
Back this video up on X. Watch it 50 times. Clearly, could he have said it a little clearer? Yeah. I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. I'm born again, yes. But we've been telling Trump, you need to be very clear about this. He's been doing it at the RNC in Milwaukee last week, everywhere. He has been totally clear about this, and he got Roe v. Wade overturned, and he's standing up against the IRS persecuting Christians, and all the rest of it, you judge a tree by its fruit. So the satanic Democrat Party that funds drag queen pedophile time everywhere.
I mean, I'll be the first that's going to point out all of the woke politics and all of the trans, but just the satanic pedophile left. I mean, these are cartoonish things to say. I mean, it's just like saying Nazi white supremacist right. It's dumb. It's lowbrow. It's aiming at the lowest common denominator. Now, I'll go into some of the darker parts of what I believe some of these people are tied to. But to say just every single person on the left, it's just stupid. I'm so tired of having to act like these are honest, good-willed people trying to inform you. Either they are that bad at this or they're trying to manipulate you. That's what my opinion has been for a long time, and I haven't hidden that, but I'm tired of how much this is influencing the conversation. I mean, I don't want to believe that people are this easily manipulated. I think that what's happening is people don't know what else to do. It's just like with the voting dynamic, and they kind of fall back in to what everyone's sending them because these are the most popular people, or at least that's what we're told, based on whatever manipulative algorithms or tech they're using to make people like this end up like, I mean, it's not even him because he's been around for a long time. And I argue a lot of the stuff he did a long time ago is, a lot of good stuff. But overall, the current people that I've mentioned a lot that I don't want to get into today, some of that Trump even literally named in his recent speech, would blow my mind, are just cartoons. Flagrantly dishonest, constantly misinforming, constantly not doing any due diligence. But we just played you that clip, by the way, recently about InfoWars, and T's talking about Richard Grove and people like Jason Burmis and the True Street Media people, that David Knight, who all left and said instead that it's just shocking lack of due diligence. They just run with things without checking them, which that's pretty easy to see from my perspective.
Is literally, and it has Satanism taught in schools where they get away with it in different areas, literal Satanism classes, Satanism after school. These people are telling you now, no, this guy's not a Christian. Well, Trump is.
But see, I know plenty of people who are saying that's what he said that aren't any of those things, who are not part of the Democrat Party, who are libertarians or even Republicans, who go, I think he just said he's not a Christian. So the way that they just try to couch this in one angle, that's why this is a distraction. This is about trying to use these points to get you thinking something else. Now, if it wasn't for the overarching point and what I think is a larger agenda around these meaningless topics, this wouldn't even be something we're talking about. Same with the other thing of the borders are all these different manipulative points. But again, I'll shout it again. And by the way, I believe Whitney's going to be joining with the conversation of Derek and Corbett and True Stream people in this upcoming conversation. It's going to be an important one, guys. I believe it's Sunday, so keep an eye out for that. Derek's the one that's going to be doing that. He'll be hosting, but this will be a good conversation because we all sense this problem, how the right, mostly right now, is being manipulated into these very same things, like the SAVE Act and digital IDs. I mean, it's everywhere right now, and it's alarming because of how real these things are. And most of the right is aware of that, but they just don't see how this is happening.
Never claimed he's Jesus. He's never claimed he's a saint. He's never been.
Oh, is that real? Is that the case? In one of his interesting comments about how he's never claimed he's.
Guy's not a Christian. Well, Trump has never claimed he's Jesus. He's never claimed he's a saint. He's never been a hypocrite, and people recognize that.
He's never been a hypocrite? Yeah, that's a pretty big statement. But what about this?
Not only that, if you take a look, intellectual property theft, add that to it, and add a lot of other things to it. So somebody had to do it. I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it.
Okay. Didn't say he's a saint, didn't call himself a god, but he sure as hell looked up at the sky and said, I am the chosen one. Now, yes, he could have been jesting. But let's not forget that Israel is adamantly, in many cases, the leadership saying that. People in Zionist, or they literally calling him, whether it was the prophet or the chosen one, something like that. We've seen this overlap a lot. A lot of his followers, after the assassination attempt especially, are openly saying that he is sent by God. It's a terrifying reality to think people are I mean, do you know what that drives to? We're talking about the level of like religious crusade type mindset that will act out. That's what the Israeli Zionists are doing, acting out in aggressive, disgusting violence, rape, torture, murder, because they believe they're on the right side by God's will in some cases. Doesn't that alarm people? So the reality is not as simple. He never said those things. Yeah, he kind of did, though. Even if you think he's joking, people believe this stuff. And I've seen you all, I don't have to sell it on you guys. You could look around the internet. People are saying it. I know personally somebody connected close to our family that is expressing those thoughts. There's somebody even talking about the meeting with Netanyahu. So, oh my God, look at how wonderful it was. He hugged him and they were so like that they're sent, that these are prophets. They're sent by God. That's actually their mindset. And we're talking about Netanyahu, for crying out loud, the guy that should have been arrested before he went to Mar-a-Lago because he's committed genocide.
Somebody had to do it. I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it. So I'm
literally, and it has Satanism taught in schools where they get away with it in different areas, literal Satanism classes, Satanism after school. These people are telling you now, no, this guy's not a Christian. Well, Trump has never claimed he's Jesus. He's never claimed he's a saint. He's never been a hypocrite, and people recognize that and know that, but they are so desperate. My question is, what are they going to pull next? I mean, literally thousands of different accounts have been posting all of this stuff, the Krasenstein, all of them saying, oh no, Trump is saying he's not a Christian. They are so incredibly desperate right now. All right, that's it for this special
You could think what you want about that. I just think it's important to recognize how obvious this is. Here's what Coronavirus Plushie said in regard to the pareidolia or pareidolia, whatever it's called, the idea that you could suggestively say something, which is, very obvious. He simply says, that's Alex Jones. He says that is the tendency for perception to what he's correcting him essentially. It is the tendency for perception to impose a meaningful interpretation on a nebulous stimulus, usually visual, so that one detects an object pattern or meaning where there is none. So, not surprising to me that it's not exactly what it is. But by the way, interestingly enough, you might have seen this whole conversation supposedly about the person's, I don't know how to say it without being crude, his ball sack hanging out of his shorts at the Olympics. If you haven't seen that, it's not something that's even that important, but it went around and it was covered. It was a major distraction. The point that Coronavirus Plushie is making is it turned out to just be simply a hole on the stockings of this person. But yet, in certain pictures and the way it's framed, it definitely makes it look like it's something else. And that like right there, but it's just a hole in these stockings he was wearing. But that just sufficiently distracted a whole lot of people. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about. And he's doing the same thing with telling you what he wants you to hear in the other case. Now, here is that video that you can watch for yourself. And this whole media platform, as they're calling out the other side, forcefully saying what they want you to think as some kind of coordinated manipulation. Well, here's the other side doing the exact same thing. Well, here's the Wall Street Journal editing out the last 2 seconds of that same clip. Guys, listen to them. It literally doesn't change anything about what the statement means. And obviously, it doesn't mean what they're trying to pretend it means. And Elon does his little bot response. Exactly. I agree. Correct. I'm telling you, there's something going on there. Now, this is just what I said about it. I said, what do you think? What do you think he said? What do you got? You tell me. I frankly find the claim that we won't have a vote again in former years and it's be fixed more interesting personally. And again, people kind of lost their minds down here. And here's the clip of the whole border czar thing, which is what I said on the 24th. I simply said, the 27th, excuse me. If this is what you're obsessed with right now, you might be lost in the two-party illusion. Things like this are often manufactured to distract from much larger and more important stories. The gov, both sides, and the media often lie. It's not a news story. But when it's this flimsy, look for what it might be hiding. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't point out they're lying, but this obsessive coverage of this entire shows around these things, that is the point. And so, I wanted to follow up with a couple of, this is the show we put out yesterday. Bird flu emergency declared, which make sure you check that out. Jason Bassler just put up a clip on our Twitter account and our Minds and our other pages as well about the clip of the show. What blew me away about this, by the way, is that within this new amendment to this previous potential declaration, where they're now saying it's an emergency declaration, it literally broadens the scope to just influenza A. That's the normal seasonal flu, if you even think that's what's happening. So they essentially just declared a pandemic emergency for just everything all the time, just flu forever. That's what that means. It's amazing how important that is. So make sure you check that out. We also talked about Israel's false flag in Syria, which again, just unbelievably obvious, with a video that David Roth Lindbergh shared, that you can literally see the Iron Dome shooting up, arcing back down, exploding, and falling right where they claim Hezbollah fired. And also remember, this is a Syrian occupied territory that largely supports Lebanon and Hezbollah. So this whole game, whether it was a mistake or a deliberate action, they murdered children playing soccer, blamed it on Hezbollah, and then went on to make a massive propaganda campaign lying about that, shouting people down, saying, how dare you not call this out, while they're killing children in Gaza every 10 seconds. And then we talk about the right makes regime change great again, and that was kind of my prediction, which even today is becoming more accurate about Venezuela. We started covering it in this conversation. We'll follow up more on it today in the next segment. But what I hope you don't miss in that is we also talked about a previous conversation around Trump's ear that I really think is pretty crazy to me. Even this does not have to mean fake or this or that. There's a lot of ways this could end up in any number of conversations. I think this whole thing is still wildly up in the air. What I know for sure is that we're being lied to in multiple ways that I think anybody can see. The inconsistencies, the changing of statements from people in leadership or in authority. But what I want you to see in this, what I still think is absolutely mind-blowing to me. Hold on. There it is. is that Ronnie Jackson, who, by the way, is now a Texas congressman, who's that weirdly become Trump's doctor only around like this ear conversation and has been since this happened, and they refuse to let out the medical records of when he was at the hospital or let any of the doctors speak about what they saw. I find that weird. And all the people around him and Secret Service and FBI apparently are supposed to be against him all the time are being quiet about it. They refuse to make comments about it. Here's what I think is important, especially on top of all the ear pictures that we can see that we from the last, I don't know, even I think 11 and 12 days forward, you could see he had the bandage off and there's literally nothing. You can think whatever you think that means. I'm not making any suggestions on top of that, but you can easily see that he has no problem with his ear right now. And this is why I think that's even more important. It says when Ronnie Jackson released the first letter Saturday evening, in it, he said the bullet that struck Trump had produced a 2-centimeter wide wound. If you're going to try to pretend that a 2-centimeter wide wound could heal to to the point of not even being able to notice it within 12 days, I got a bridge to sell you. This is crazy. Now, of course, my point was maybe Ronnie lied about it to kind of up Trump's clout, to say I was shot and it was a big thing. Who knows? That's my point. Is it could mean a number of things, but that does not line up. There's something very strange right there. Now, it's weird to me how the people who are usually in the past usually the people that will jump to assumptive points about these kind of things without even checking for facts are now the people that are going narrative, trust the narrative, you can't challenge it, you're a conspiracy theorist. And that's in this article too, where Ronnie Jackson is literally shouting down people who are asking questions, saying, how dare you ask that question? How disrespectful. You mean questions about what happened? As we can see, we're being misled. Do you know what would happen if this story was about Biden? My God, you could only imagine. Every possible question under the sun would be asked because that's how this should go. But it's weird that now suddenly there's a resistance there, even though there's plenty of conservatives, they're also calling this out. It's very strange to me. Now, yes, I will follow up on this, but my point in this, unless there's something new that really does change the dynamic, which I'll show you in a second, which I think is, where were we? Actually, I should bump that up. Oh, no, it was right here. Perfect. This is actually pretty nuts. This is a pretty interesting video that adds even more to this. So remembering that, knowing that there's undeniably an anomaly here, and the idea of the angles, wherever Crooks or whoever it was on that roof, wherever that person was on that roof, there's no way, in my opinion, he could have shot the top upper back part of Trump's ear. Clearly, it doesn't even seem like there's a problem with it now. So even if we want to talk second shooter, water tower, whatever, how do we explain that there's no problem with his ear? And then again, let's just say maybe he got some kind of miraculous, next level billionaire plastic surgery. Right? Just throwing it out there that we don't even know how good it is and you can't even tell. Okay, maybe that's the truth. Maybe that would explain it. But that's the kind of answer we need right now. Otherwise, this is very, very suspicious. And even then, obviously, I'm going to question that, but we'd have to verify these things. But here's a video that was put out by Matt Launter, Sniper's Nest video that was released by Dave Stewart of Butler, Pennsylvania from the 13th. His cell phone was actually first confiscated by the FBI initially, then they returned it to him. Now, check out what this video shows, guys. It's about 7 minutes. I'm only going to show you a little bit of it, but it'll be included. You can watch it. What you're going to see is as Trump is still speaking, and pretty way before but the actual shooting, the cops are surrounding the very building that this kid is on with their guns drawn. And you're going to tell me that they're going to let Trump keep speaking? So to me, this is, at this point, the most obvious evidence thus far, or, some other examples pretty much equal, but very obviously suggest that this is either the allowance for this to happen, which could have been the actual attempt to kill Trump, or that this was all manufactured to benefit Trump, or any number of other possibilities, but that they were somehow involved with letting him stay on the stage. I really just don't know how you logically make sense of this.
Okay.
This is no trespassing. Oh,
Sorry, we didn't see any signs.
So this is at 5:02. Shooting was at what, 6:11?
This guy's kicking everybody out. He's raging.
Yeah, 6:11. Okay, so what you're going to see right now, this is the building. The one you're seeing right there behind him, that's the building he was supposedly on. To the right is the water tower. right? And so basically behind this person would be where Trump would be. Now, you're going to first listen carefully. You're going to hear the people behind him going like, there's cops, their guns are out, they're circling the building. And you can literally see a cop with his gun drawn. I don't know what that one thing alone. If a cop had his gun drawn, that means they're a potential situation. There's no way they would have let Trump keep speaking. There's no way, unless this was designed to kill him or that there was involvement with manufacturing some illusion.
If he was doing the job, I wouldn't even be doing this. There's fucking cops surrounding this whole entire fucking building
right there. Right there. He's got his gun drawn. There's no question. That's the building right there.
There's something going on in this building.
See, there's the water tower. There's the parking lot, right? This is the building. Like, and let's just even say they don't know for sure he's on the building. The fact that they're walking around with their guns drawn, guys, that's huge. There's no way in any normal circumstance, they would have let him keep speaking if they have enough reason to draw their guns, or if they have the justification to draw their guns. There's just no way.
Instead, I'm here with you fighting like hell to get a senator elected and to make sure.
Oh my God. There's somebody in this building.
And it's not easy because we have millions and millions of people that are dangerous people.
And remember, there's people in the building with the window that overlooks that building. The argument is they left, I guess, to look for him. But there's all these different overlaps to where and there's the snipers that are behind Trump that are well before this, like 17 minutes before, they were looking right in this direction with their binoculars. I didn't realize they would have gotten wind of this. Somebody would have said, we're investigating. And this would have been clear.
We have criminals, we have drug dealers, we have people that just not be here. And it's much frustrating. In recorded history, we're the best order. In fact, if they could ever put up a chart, I don't know if they could do it.
There's that person with the flag they were talking about. I don't even know why that was relevant for that original question.
Take a look at that chart. Take a look at the arrow at the bottom. See the big red arrow, right? So that's what I'm talking about.
Just mind blowing. I mean, think how long this has been happening right now. When they have enough justification to draw their guns. Now he's running. There's a cop back there running. Right at this point by now, right in this time frame, there's already people calling attention to him with a gun. That's already happened. Saying there's a guy up there. The timestamps on these, you can clearly tell that. And you can hear Trump's speech in the background if you listen closely, and just getting close to the moment.
Make yourself small, bro. I don't know what's going on.
Right there. See, in the background, you heard the guy say he's got a gun, right? Think of how long this has been happening before that. So he said, I can't confirm this. I just heads up because I'm not. The person who made this video is writing Dave Smith, red shirt, videoed from bleachers at Trump rally. There's the shot. Now, even right there, let's listen to that again. Right? So, under the argument of the different locations, right? This is interesting. This shows you the sound of the shots, or at least from this one phone. And I would also point out that the fact that this came out after the fact, there's a level of suspicion there for me, right? That this very well could all be put in front of us for obvious reasons, but there's no evidence for that at this point. But just consider that. Always consider all possibilities. Now, that last one just sounded a little different, but it seems to be somewhat in the same location. So that could be the point, if we want to read into it, of possibly somebody inside the building. That was one of the points that I think Martinson and others made. That's that kind of different sound of the shot. That would make sense. It didn't sound like it was far away, right? So if this was being shot from the water tower, then that wouldn't be as loud. So that's interesting. And now, look, there's people on... Oh, is that people? No, is that trees? Right there. Yeah, those are trees. Never mind. Okay, so at this point, you've heard shots, and there's just cops standing over there. Now, that was that last shot. Or maybe not, because that was a pretty long time. But we definitely have that last night shot. Yeah. So that's the point we keep making about that last one. So we're supposed to believe that's the shot that killed him, because they say they found 8 shells on the roof. But I just don't know how that makes sense. There's so many contradicting narratives from the court, from the authorities. So for me, that the first part was what's most important. I'm surprised this guy's just standing here. This is really close.
Get
right?
down, guys. Get down. Yeah, just get down. Get behind this tree with me. Get behind this tree.
Oh, so maybe
Get behind this tree, guys. No. I'm just safe back here. Here.
Fucking pick that dude off.
Did they pick him off?
Fuck yeah, I saw a big poof of hair go up in the air.
Oh,
They
fuck
shot him right in
yeah.
the head.
Fuck yeah.
So sorry for the cursing. So yeah, so at this point, then that was that last shot, right? And so that's why we have the video where you can see him turning towards them, which kind of challenges the 1 in a million shot where they said they hit him through the scope in the eye or whatever. And we have the shot now. It shows him leaning up and aiming at the crowd, which is where you hear him in the last time we've shown you that video where he goes, he's turning towards us. Again, all of that contradicts the larger narrative we get from how this actually happened and who shot and what time it happened.
Yeah.
Big poof of hair.
Holy shit, guys.
What happened
That's
over here? You
fucking
got 4
crazy.
shots off. Are you fucking shitting?
In the middle of it.
Like a headshot?
Weirdly, they don't seem to be worried that Trump was shot, right? Because they don't know. They're not over there. They don't know what's going on. Wouldn't you first be going, did he get shot? Not that it has to mean anything. I just think that's interesting. I mean, don't you think they're just kind of milling around? I mean, what the hell is going on? Like, I get it. There's not a ladder, but like, would these cops just be, I don't know, just everything about the way they're acting through everything we see just doesn't really line up with what we would expect. But that could just mean that they're, we watch so many movies that make us think they're some kind of action heroes when really that's just not what's going on. But you guys can decide for yourself. I find that to be pretty damn crazy. So thank you, Matt, for sharing this. Very interesting. Now, we're going to continue to follow up on this as well. I just think these things tend to get mired in the kind of partisan narrative back and forth, and it's very difficult as they go forward to kind of pull out the truths of it all. And it ultimately ends up very like they said with Cheadle. What often happens is we want an independent investigation, and then it kind of comes out, and it's a very like 9/11 report or like Warren report kind of thing that just doesn't really answer. It's just a narrative control. And then everyone says it's not enough. And then nothing happens after that. It's almost always what happens. So I'm very suspicious as always about these things. Now on another follow-up, and this all comes off the recent show we just did. Here's a conversation about the Golan Heights. Just a quick follow-up I wanted to show you. Where did I just close that on accident? Oh, it's right there. And this is Saeed speaking with Patel. And asking about the Golan Heights. And just the way he responds to this just shows you that they know what they're doing, that they know it's an illegally occupied territory. And despite the reality, they're just saying, no, we stand with Israel no matter what. So what he's going to say is that because of what we say is a threat, even though those threats are not breaking the law, such as Iran being present in Syria, which you could argue is not even actually what's happening in the sense of what they're claiming anyway. They're allies. Syria is an ally with Iran. They're allowed to be in each other's countries. The point is that they don't get to say that is a problem for us. Therefore, we get to then break the law. That's exactly what they do. And this is, again, even this you could tie back into the two-party conversation and how that is used to say that we're the good side. Therefore, we're allowed to sort of ignore rules and laws because we're fighting for the good things. I guess I didn't grab that. 1 second. Saeed, Ericat always doing a good job on these things. I actually have some, reasonable questions being asked. And what's interesting is even by some of the corporate media people, which I argue is just simply because it's an obvious reality that they need to try to regain clout and control. Okay, here's the video.
But, you know, does that in any way, I mean, it's a tragic incident, of course, but that in any way spotlight the fact that the Golan Heights is occupied Syrian territory, that Majd al-Shams is a Syrian town, that the people that were killed were actually Syrian citizens. Does that spotlight the fact that this occupation, it's time for this occupation to end?
Said, our U.S. policy on the Golan Heights has not changed under this administration. That should be no surprise to you. I will echo what you've heard the Secretary say a number of times, that Golan is very important and vital to Israel's security. And as long as the Assad regime is in power in Syria, as long as Iran and its proxies continue to be present in Syria, as long as militia groups backed by Iran continue to be in Syria, and the Assad regime itself poses a significant security threat to Israel. As a practical matter, the control of the Golan, it remains of real importance to Israel's security.
Right, so who cares about the law? We want it, right? It's important to us, so shut up, right? Or the idea of the armed groups or whatever. Oh, so you can arm the Kurds and the moderate rebels and just dump all sorts of terrorist entities in there for your benefit, but they can't arm groups to defend themselves because that's terrorism. You know, the U.S. government platform, the narrative, the way they present themselves, it's never been more ridiculously transparent. It's embarrassing while they're supporting genocide to stand up and act like, you know, and even he didn't even try. What he said is explicit. We don't want that. And so until that's not the case, we'll do what we want. That's what he just said. It is illegally occupied. That's the United Nations. That's the obvious international law reality, and even been expressed in some cases through the United States government. And now they just go, well, sorry, Israel needs that stuff. We need the water we steal from that. We need the strategic location to bomb down on Syria illegally all the time. We need that. So therefore, we don't care. That's what he just said, if you want to break down the reality of the meaning.
So you're saying that, you know, the designation of the Golan Heights, according to 242 and 338, as occupied territory is contingent on who's leading Syria? And who's the ruler of Syria?
What I'm saying is that our policy...
Yes, that is what he's saying. He's saying that the law doesn't matter unless we get what we want. So if you have the right leader there, and this gets into the Venezuela conversation, the leader that they think they can manipulate, well, then we'll abide by the law. Until then, we have to act for freedom. You know, it's just this real... It is America World Police. It's that movie. These people are ridiculous, right? Acting like you're fighting for, you know, spreading freedom and you're just destroying everything. That's what these people are.
Our policy as it relates to the Golan Heights hasn't changed.
Okay,
it hasn't changed. Doesn't matter. Stop asking. Stop pretending like we actually care about human life, okay? Just move on. That's what he's saying. So in regard to the Hezbollah discussion, in regard to them claiming that they bombed the area, let's not forget, and this is from July 29th, by the way, so this is new. This is the U.S. government. As we showed you during the last show, and I recommend you watch this one to get caught up on these stories. If you don't, the overall point being, as I just told you, that they essentially blamed their mistake or deliberate action that killed children on Hezbollah. But the point is that the U.S. government has not backed them, really. They've been really wishy-washy about it, because I think they clearly know that this will be both of their destruction. And so they're saying, oh, just stop, rein in. U.S. leads the push to rein in Israel's response. Don't bomb Beirut. Imagine having to say that. Think of how embarrassing that is. You know, because that would be a crime, because that is a massively civilian populated area. But they have to stand up publicly and go, don't do that. Stop. You're already committing genocide. Don't make this even worse. I mean, I don't even think they care. I think it's about the fact they know they will lose if this happens, in the sense of just lose all sorts of things, strategic control, clout, lose in general. But important to recognize that Israel's the one driving this. And so who's really driving the bus? It goes both ways sometimes. I think it's the reality that Israel has a lot of different ways to manipulate them into doing whatever they want, because they're forced into it. They've already painted themselves into this corner. But I also think the U.S. does have a lot of ability, if they wanted to influence the outcome by, you know, not arming them. But that's where you start to get into the overlapping darker things, you know, like the sexual blackmail networks and lobbying and whatever else they're using to influence people like Brian Mast to just sell out their entire country. But just so it's clear, here's what they were saying back on December 17, 2023. Glant warns Hezbollah. Israel can do in Beirut what it is doing in Gaza. That's how brazen they are, acting with impunity in their minds. So let's not pretend like he means we'll go save the civilians from Hamas in Beirut, which is not even what they're doing here. But this is the fake narrative. We're saving them as they murder all of them. And they then go on to say they're all human animals and they're all the same and they're all Hamas. But then when they speak to some Western audiences, they give you the narrative. What he says, what he means, we're going to destroy Beirut, which, by the way, is what they want to do anyway. Ask Smotrich, Ben Gvir. They'll tell you that. So just recognize they're already been telling you that that's what they're going to do. And the U.S. government is so afraid to go, well, just don't bomb them. Stop. What happened to the whole self-defense narrative? Which is a completely illegitimate argument to say that you can murder civilians because you're defending yourself, which is not. You're actually attacking after you were attacked. The point is that is the contradictive narrative. If you're saying over here, because they were bombed in October or attacked on October 7th, that they can then carry out 9+ months of genocide and that's defending yourself, why wouldn't this be the same, U.S. government? Oops. This is what happens when you fall into these kind of things. They're caught. They're dishonest. Everybody sees them. And now they're standing up in the news and saying, don't do it, please. Pretty embarrassing. Now let's get into Venezuela. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I forgot. This was the first point that I want to get into in regard to AU10TIX, which I think is very interesting. Now, on that note, by the way, the reason this conversation even came about, just want people to see this. Make sure so basically this account is not me. This is TLAV_A, obviously 0 followers. And it was joined by, July 2024. And it literally uses my thing. And then it says OnlyFans horsecock. That's what it says. I guess it's a compliment. So I guess thank you. But either way, the point is that this is a pretend account trying to be me. And going around, commenting other things, pretending it's me, putting out these things that say, I keep fighting legal lawfare against me. Just these people they're just dumb, right? So you can see that's why it's more of a humorous thing, to be honest, about how ineffectual these things are. But it says, I've decided to start an OnlyFans, which there's not even like a link or anything. It's like this is aimed at just trying to make me look bad. So think about that for a second. There's not like they're trying to trick you into crypto or try to make something from it. This is a person or an account or an entity that has been put to just trying to make TLAV look bad, or me personally. Yeah, who thinks we're not over the target, huh? How obvious is that? But anyway, the point was I wouldn't even care to show you this, other than the point is that I went in to reach out to Twitter and say, hey, this is a person pretending to be me. Just block it again, otherwise they'll keep commenting on everything I do. So I went to go through the process to say, hey, they're impersonating me. And they went to this thing and said, okay, fill this form out. And sure enough, it went to this spot, which I include the link. It does seem to pop up for anybody that clicks it. And here's what it says, guys. Don't forget. Oh, and I did forget I wanted to grab this stuff real quick before I forget that. Censored Man has been doing great work breaking this down. And, I think honestly was responsible for why they pretended at least to stop this, and maybe it will later. But this is Censored Man back on the 13th of June saying, before verifying your ID with AU10TIX on X, read this thread. And the bottom line is they're working with Israeli intelligence entities to pretend to stop the bots that are clearly overtaking Twitter, that shows you how that worked. And the fact that AU10TIX is an Israeli intelligence company. So there's in every possible way we're being sold out to this country. And on the main point he made is that it was taking your biometric data, even if that's not what Twitter needed. So that's why this is important. Because here's what this says. And this again is in regard to, pointing out you're being impersonated. And he says, we're sorry you're having this experience. X does not tolerate accounts or communities that pose as another person. That's false. They very much do, as long as it's the people like us or Whitney Webb, who's dealing with this all over the place, Facebook and Twitter. It's all over, and they don't care. And I've had this problem before where I reach out and they don't care. In fact, they respond and say, there's no problem here. But here's the point. To continue, please verify your identity, which why would that need to be done? I'm logged in, right? You clearly went from my account. You know it's me, because this is more than just verification for this one thing. It says all you'll need is your government ID, your driver's license on the camera, prepared to take a selfie and photos of your ID. What? Why would you need any of that stuff? I didn't have to do that to set up my Twitter account. See, they're just trying to coerce you into it. That's probably what some of these things are being done for, to drive people like me into this. Just hypothetical. But look at what it says down here. You have to check that. By the way, this box was auto-checked. It says, I consent to X and AU10TIX. What do you know? Using my images and my ID and my selfie, including extracted biometric data. Why would that be necessary, seeing as how Twitter doesn't even require that? because this is not about what you think it's about. This is terrifying, guys. When I saw this, so what I was saying before, that's weird. I didn't even click. Did I just unclick on its own? So here's what's interesting. Let's be clear about this. This is a legal process. Twitter, like any massive company like this, billion-dollar company, they have entire teams of people that make sure they don't find themselves in a position that they'll be sued or something like that. There is no way this is, oops, we left that up, which I'm sure somebody will argue. Because then that means two things. One, you're not clicking this box for Stripe, which is what they claim they're using to authenticate you, which then means there's a legal loophole, there's a legal opening right there to be sued. But you're also consenting to a legal process with a company that they would, in the hypothetical, claiming that they don't work with anymore. All sorts of legal problems there. I do not believe for a second this would be accidentally happening. This, to me, shows you that Twitter is still using AU10TIX. They're still using the Israeli company, despite Elon Musk publicly saying we won't do that anymore. In fact, I should have done that too. I forgot to grab all this stuff. See if I can grab it real quick. If you remember for this, if you type in anything on the search and then hit advanced search, you can look for certain words. I'll just do Stripe and see if that works. Oops, I can't spell apparently. Okay, and then we'll go Elon. There it is. Well, I don't see it. Let's go latest. No, not that one. He mentioned Stripe when he said this, right? No, I don't see it. How does that make sense? Did he delete that tweet? One more look. God, I wish I would have looked this before. I forgot to get into this. So, okay, regardless, you guys all know. We went over this in the show. It was a very public discussion where he said Stripe would now be what they were using. Isn't that strange? That's not coming up in his search. Does that mean he deleted that tweet? That would be very relevant, wouldn't it? I'll follow up on this. Either way, they're still doing this with AU10TIX. And I think that's a big deal. One, you're being lied to about what's happening, and you're still dumping your biometric data over to Israel at a time when we know there's something very think about this. What about their Palestinians using this stuff in the United States or elsewhere? What do you think they're going to do with that? Deny you for sure if they don't want you using this, but store your biometric data. This just blows me away. Now, again, I posted this on so you guys can see this and share it. I hope you will. As I went to report yet another fake TLAV account, which Twitter doesn't care about in most cases, I noticed something important. Twitter is still using AU10TIX to verify, despite what Elon said. And I simply said, thank you, troll. You helped me see this. And then here's the troll. You're welcome, Mr. Horse Whore. People are ridiculous. I just think it's worth laughing at. It's childish. It's small. And if you look at the actual account itself, what's funny about it is, just look at the kind of stuff that they're sharing. It's like a 6-year-old, I don't even, who cares? Go have fun, make fun of me. It's just so funny that this is what they think might have an effect, but clearly it is about trying to, muddy your reputation, I guess. Very strange. But my point on top of that is make sure you mass flag this for me. Oh, that was the major point there, is that I'm not going to do this. I hope that was clear. I am not going to, when I saw that, I said, hell no. I'm not going to go through this ridiculous process. I wouldn't do that to keep my Twitter account right now, which is what they keep saying is going to happen. I'm not going to do that. So I'm not going to. What I can see is that for other people, which tells me something, like if you want to flag this, you don't have to go through that process. You can flag it as a random viewer and say, this is impersonating this TLAV account. So mass flag this for me. Go into this account, mass flag it so this gets deleted, because it's just people like this they're just ridiculous. But I think it's important to see this is a problem right now, guys. And here's an example of the supposed free speech platform. Into thin air. Pretty prominent account. I think it's got pretty large following, right? It's about 100,000, give or take, 96,000. Sorry, everyone. X had me banned all day for saying something not nice about Bill Gates. Yeah, same old, isn't it? Funny how we like to pretend everything changed, even though it's just all a bunch of narrative. Now, as always, I got my account back, but I think what we're dealing with right now is a lot more nefarious than anything we dealt with before. I hope I'm wrong. Sadly, I think we're going to get to a point where it's going to become self-evident, and it'll be too late by then. But I hope you're paying attention. And I'll include this from Censored Man breaking this stuff down. He did a whole thread on this that went, a whole bunch of different tweets on this. I think this one has his tweet. Anyway, you guys can search for it. Just search AU10TIX on the CensorBand account. You'll find all the work. It's shocking. It's shocking. Now, from that, let's get into Venezuela, right? And so overlapping with foreign countries for verification, I mean, the kind of in this relationship with Elon Musk in a lot of different ways, whether it's military contractors or Great Reset overlap technology or any number of things, foreign countries. In this case, seemingly starting sort of a digital coup, if you want, if you will, around Venezuela. I personally think this has a lot more to do with Israel specifically, and then just in general, the lithium in this country and the foreign policy directives of the government at large. So here is what he said on the 27th. Now, this is what I talked about in the last show. So this is just getting you caught up briefly with some of the stuff we talked about yesterday, and then we'll get into today. But on the 27th, before this had to be, so Maduro won this election today, or late yesterday into today. Before that, though, he said, it is time for the people of Venezuela to have the chance for a better future. Support Maria Machado is her name. And this is an openly backed by Israel entity who literally wrote a letter to Israel, to Netanyahu personally, that said, what? I had that right there. Hold on. There it is. Oh, that's why. I thought it was the wrong icon. So wrote this into it's Maria Corina Machado in 2018 to Netanyahu personally, literally asking for a regime change, saying we need a regime change urgently, despite the fact that it's undeniably obvious, internationally observed, that Maduro has very obvious popular support. It's if you question that, which you should, look into our previous work. The point is that if you end up feeling that way just because that's the narrative from the right now, despite all of the evidence, then you don't want to hear the truth because it's obvious. Look, I can certainly be wrong, but it's undeniable coming off the whole Guaido fiasco, the starvation campaign, the theft of their gold. The people know this, guys, especially with social media today. The Venezuelan people are very aware. Just tap into their social media, read what people are saying. They are very aware that the U.S. government is responsible for all this. So now we're at a point where the only person that seems to be pushing back on that is Maduro. And all these people that get shuffled around him, like the Guaidos of the world or like Machado, are obvious, provable assets, or at least allies of the very entity they know is trying to hurt them. So even if Maduro is everything they're saying, the point is that it's obvious the choice for them is to fight against the imperialism. And then Anya Parampal simply says, sorry, but globalism doesn't win in Venezuela. And that's her right there shaking hands with George Bush. Because they're usually the freedom fighters, right? The George Bush lackeys. This is also what the Squirrel put out this great thread about the history around Israel funding these groups. And this is Chavez publicly telling everybody Israel finances the opposition to Venezuela, still to this very day, which is what we're talking about. Literally working with the people they want to replace. It's like everywhere else, like the normalization conversation. That's what this government does. Same with the United States. But it says, Elon Musk, he writes, the genocidal Zionist puppet of Israel just endorsed the far-right Zionist opposition to Venezuela, because that's what she is. So for those on the right that are actively calling out the Zionist problem in Israel and the world for that matter, recognize the same thing that's going on in Venezuela. But then he goes on to do a great thread talking about the, as he calls them, the rape death squads, but the classically called death squads of they're moderate rebels that these kind of groups fund. And the story, it's horrifying. And it's very, here's Jeffrey Sachs talking about a similar conversation, but this is all source material. It's not an actual video of people testifying to what they saw them do. And weirdly enough, this one is almost identical to what they claimed happened on October 7th, which has been proven to be false. Where do you think that idea came from? What they've funded and committed in the past. Rape, mutilation, horrifying things. Here's Afshin Ratansi. I always say his name weird. And he's from Going Underground. Maria Corina Machado, who has been labeled Venezuela's Margaret Thatcher, is in fact a CIA asset running for president via her proxy, Edmundo Gonzalez, who's also running, by the way. She wrote to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu asking for help to carry out a regime change. And briefly, just the points I said before, people of Venezuela need international protection. No, in fact, what they want is the international community to get the hell out of their country. But it simply says they're being attacked by government forces. What they're talking about is their agenda and their group. The current regime is criminal by nature and maintains close ties with drug cartels and terrorism. Even if you want to argue that's the case, which I'm sure, I think all these governments are doing similar things. As I said last time, it's impossible to make sense of the idea that you're calling them a narco-terrorist while you're literally working with Colombia that exports more cocaine than anybody in the world. It's obvious hypocrisy. And it's not about they care about these things. It's about using them as a means to an end. Support the people of Venezuela in their quest to generate an urgently needed regime change. And then, of course, it says, until a change of regime occurs, hemispheric and global security shall be at risk. And their whole big push is that they will work with Israel. They will have a close relationship with Israel if you come in and do this. And now the other point, and this was to show you that it's not just the left, right? There's right out there supporting Maduro as well. But the point on top of this is that we know that they are pushing that they will work more with Israel should you make sure that we win. And they've also said, well, we'll move an embassy to Israel, all these different statements, which I'll show you in a second. Now, coming into yesterday into today, here's an important place to start. Here's Elon Musk, once again, blindly sharing Zionist propaganda. This, which by the way, has already been deleted because it was provably false. Weird how that keeps happening. And I said, by the way, this is what we're first going to point at. Elon has now deleted, which I don't know if you've seen, his tweet where he famously said, we'll coup whoever we want, as he begins a coup over Twitter right now, in my opinion. But we'll come back to this. This is that Visregrad account, which is provably false. That's funny. Now this is in a different one. They've changed this thing. This community notes system is so ridiculous. I'll come back to that. That's like the third different change on this. But starting with the point of he'll coup whoever he wants, then we'll come back to the claim that he shared, which was important because it was claiming that the Maduro regime was stealing votes in boxes and we caught him on film. It was a complete lie. Visregrad knew that. They got Elon to share it. Too late, sort of like what Alex Jones was talking about, right? Too late now, we already shared it. Yeah, happens all over the place in the two-party illusion, both left and right. Before we get to that, don't forget this. He deleted the tweet, but it is very real. He did definitely say it. He said, we will coup whoever we want with it, deal with it, in response to somebody saying, well, first, he said another government stimulus package is not the best interest of the people. And this person says, you know what wasn't in the best interest of the people? The U.S. government organizing a coup against Evo Morales in Bolivia so you could obtain the lithium there. Now, whether you think that was the core reason, definitely part of it. And he says, and then responding to it, we will coup whoever we want, deal with it. And now he deleted that. Doesn't that show you something? Now, I don't know exactly when that was deleted. It would be even more relevant if it just happened, but I don't know. But he goes, we also get lithium from Australia. So clearly you see this is what that was. He knew that was not something he wants you to see now. And just in case you want to see these articles writing about it, here's Guardian. We will coup whoever we want. The unbearable hubris of Musk and the billionaire tech bros. Here's Counterpunch. We will coup whoever we want. Elon Musk and the overthrow of democracy in Bolivia. 100% what happened. All the lies about the election. It's the same thing that's happening now. International observers the world around, hundreds of them, saw what happened and testified that it was up and up. The OAS, which is a completely co-opted entity, the Organization of American States, screamed that it was a stolen election. And then once the military junta was put in place in Bolivia, they weirdly stopped talking about democracy, right? Because that's the shining example of democracy, a military control, right? No, they didn't care about anything other than the U.S. government getting what they wanted. So they pushed Evo Morales out of the way, and then the country suffered ever since, like every other one they've done. But this is relevant for this conversation about the lies around the election, around what's going on here, about the Elon Musk apparatus pushing what they want you to think is going on. Now, also important to recognize that there's lithium in Venezuela too. But here is Evo Morales discussing Elon Musk's tweet before a crowd of thousands of people, telling you that he will coup whoever we want. His point was the same. The owner of Twitter and the electric car company, lithium, the battery, all of this stuff. It's clear that he believes that was one of the reasons this happened. It very well could be the only reason, guys. You can go back to the idea of fruit companies in South America and regime change for that purpose alone. It's not that far-fetched. Frankly, I think there's a lot of other moving parts, but you have to recognize how important this is. So it may very well be happening again. If you don't realize how important lithium and specifically rare, or I guess more broadly, rare earth minerals are to what they're doing, you're not paying attention. And there are wars in many cases being fought over primarily things just like this. Of course, they want to tell you it's about freedom and then destroy all of those things to get what they want. Venezuela lithium reserves According to various sources, Venezuela is estimated to have significant lithium reserves. One report estimates the country has 236 billion barrels of lithium, equivalent to around 42 billion tons. This makes Venezuela a notable player in the global lithium market. Gee, I wonder if that plays a factor to why he's going, look at what they're doing. Venezuela is being taken by Maduro. It's what they're all doing right now. Okay, back to the point that he got caught spreading, even though it was false, but it's still up. He might delete that too. Visegrad has now deleted the tweet. Here's what it said. And of course, you can't see the video now, which would make it even more embarrassing. It's sort of like the fake Trump earshot that Alex Jones and Luke Rudowski and everybody shared without even looking, that was so shockingly fake. Well, this one was also similarly stupid. Visegrad, who's been caught doing just this, posting fake things and then deleting it countless times post October 7th. They're not a news group, guys. This is a straight up Israeli propaganda entity. What it says is armed communist Maduro gangs are now storming polling stations and stealing. Didn't happen. But not too late now, because the narrative is already seeding the entire conversation. And he goes, this is messed up, with his, 45 million followers? At the time, it got 2.5 million views. What is it now? 42 million views. 42 million. That's bigger than some countries. Guys, think about how crazy that is. And it was false. Here is Ryan Rusbiani saying, those are air conditioners, man. Aren't you an engineer? Yeah, probably because he doesn't care. My opinion. But if you watch it, which you could probably find the video somewhere, it's ridiculous. And read the comments. Everybody's like, obviously this is, he goes, dude, obviously gets tricked easily. It's embarrassing. I think it's because it was about seeding this narrative, possibly on purpose, because you'd want whatever the agenda is. It's not just Elon and his personal lithium. This is a government operation. And I'm convinced that he's part of whatever we're dealing with right now. That's completely my opinion. But this overlaps with the idea of the presidency, Trump's presidency, clearly what's going to happen, in my opinion. Vance and Thiel and the overlap and all the Palantir conversations and all the data they're combing from Palantir and Twitter to use for that. Oh, and so here, let me grab the other one I just grabbed. It's weird how these change so often. So here's what it says now. It just changed again. My God, if this changes, like here's you have to understand what you're looking at with regard to how these community notes work. It's like democracy, like nothing we should want. It's mob rule. That's what it means. So in some cases, it might work out to the benefit of the most amount of people if you pretend that's what this is. But ultimately, it comes down to just being able to manipulate the outcome by having enough influence, right? So if you have a lot of Zionist friends and you're all up there poaching, ask Syrian girl. She actually is one of the people that does these things, and she'll tell you that. She'll watch these things get mobbed and change the entire direction into a provably false statement. So that's why I've seen this change 3 times in the last 2 seconds. It says, those are thieves stealing air conditioners, and a woman can be heard in the back saying so. That's the case. I'm not trying to say that they're always false, but I think it's strange that it's like a battle between who has more people to lie or push the narrative. In some cases, the narrative is accurate. Here's the other. This is what it said a second ago. Oh, that's a similar one. Here's what it said before that. It is visually clear in the video that the boxes being carried out are air conditioning units. The woman is saying so. Similar, right? Bad example. My point in showing you that is just you can see that this is what happens. The point's the same, whether that ended up being accurate or not, is that it's sort of like the mob aspect can very much change the outcome. But that's what he said. This is messed up. And this person says, that's hilarious. Elon getting community noted. So Megatron says, you're spreading fake news. These are air conditioners. It has nothing to do with the recent votings in Venezuela. But 45 million views later, it's already changed the conversation. Gen X girl, says, oh my God, every account trending high and posting about overthrowing Maduro, based largely off this starting conversation, is pro-Israel, which is very easy to see. Do you think that's by accident? Remember, we're showing you the idea, the reality that they are, the person they're trying to put in his place wrote to Netanyahu asking for regime change. And she's also a CIA overlapped asset. She's clearly part of a larger apparatus that has nothing to do with what Venezuelan people want. She says, check the trend for yourself. And you can look at all these. You've seen all these accounts. All of them screaming the same false thing. And a lot of them, these large right-wing accounts, Maduro stole elections, pass it on. I mean, therefore I am, says. Here, Elon sharing another tweet from this same fake account that lies all the time. Because it's not about facts, it's about narrative, about controlling what you want. Same Visegrad fake account, it's an account, but they lie about everything. President Milei released a statement, the fake libertarian that was also aggressively pro-Israel, pretending to be on the side of freedom for the right, and they all fell for it. Or the Republicans of the two-party illusion, not all conservatives, did fall for this. Dictator Maduro, get the hell out. And again, to say that doesn't mean that every person across the board. I'm saying as a larger general concept that the right was largely what got taken by this. Dictator Maduro, get the hell out. This guy is such a cartoon. Breaking. That's what he says. And Elon shares it. Shame on Dictator Maduro. Like, it's just, and this is what people talk about. It's irresponsible. What you're saying is influencing more than, this is not just some guy with a Twitter account, guys. Not only is this the largest, most influential account in most any social media anywhere, as far as I can tell, what he's doing has real world consequences. He has the ability to actually change outcomes for his benefit or for other things, for the U.S. government. That's what this is. And then what's interesting, Visegrad, again, shares what Maduro says. Maduro calls Elon Musk his arch enemy and says Elon wants to come to Venezuela with an army and his space rockets and invade it. Well, of course, they're trying to make what he says sound dumb. What he's actually simply acknowledging is that this very well may be an agenda to come and do exactly what we're talking about. And then he says, Elon, can you confirm or deny? And then he literally responds and says, does he have space lasers? Because I do. It's not a joke, man. It's ridiculous what the cavalier way that you're literally driving a regime change. Disgusting. And here's Eva Bartlett with one separate example, but also another false push from a large account from Douglas McGregor, Colonel Douglas McGregor. Now, of course, he's already deleted the post as well. It's a different one, but he also deleted it because it's also false. But before it went around the world, or after, excuse me. And she says McGregor is lying. Or I guess you could argue he was wrong, but either way, it's the same point. She says these are not gangs nor violent. It was an image of gangs roaming around to stop people from voting. It's the same stuff we see every time. The same lies every time. It says they are Venezuelans amassing to prevent violence from the Western-backed opposition gangs that McGregor is whitewashing. And if anybody knows these things, it's people like Eva Bartlett who have been there, who have watched these things, or someone like Anna Martin or Vanessa Beeley who have actually taken the time to understand them. Suddenly blanking on the name. It'll come to me. There's plenty of Fiorella, for example. I believe she's been there. If not, she's been the one that has been traveling overseas, like Pasta as well, going to these places and actually watching the elections. And they've testified to these things. Now, they could be wrong, of course, but they'll tell you a very different story than what you hear from these partisan screamers that have never even been there. And these people, Evo, Vanessa, these aren't left. These are people that have a varying position on lots of different political standings that I argue go back between left and right, because that's what most honest people have. Opinions that seem to kind of end up all over the place because the left and right dynamic is a ridiculous illusion. And they've changed so much over the years that they might as well be flip-flopped at this point, but they all just stand with their team sport politics side. But she says, you can hear them warning about violence and saying Venezuelans want peace. And that's why he's deleted it, you understand, because he was wrong. And now he knows that, or he got caught and wants to hide that. She says the man in yellow hat warns of the garambas of the violent opposition, meaning the side that the U.S. government and the United States, or rather, and Israel are supporting. She says, I saw similar in 2019, joined one motorcycle rally, then two, to hear what they had to say. And she posted right here. On March 30th, she joined hundreds of members of a motorcycle taxi union, Collectivo, during the motorcycles through and around Caracas in a show of support for their country and defiance against foreign intervention. Now, they point to these very kind of groups and act like they're all socialist, dictator, monster terrorists, or whatever their hyperbolic, stupid terms are. It's sort of like how Israel's like terror dungeons and rape factories. Same thing. Where do you think this stuff comes from? It says these were women and men making a statement with their physical presence. They would not allow their country to be attacked from within or without. Eva Bartlett's doing amazing work. She has been for her entire career. Now, this is what I find to be the most important aspect of this. And this is why, in large, one of the parts, the whole show today overlaps with it. We started with the first part about the two-party illusion. Because if you're trapped in this right now and you're picking sides based on it, you're being played. Here's what's important. Let me play this first. Here's what Blinken said. And remember, Blinken is part of the U.S. President Biden administration.
If my colleagues will indulge me for just 1 minute, I want to speak quickly to the elections that just took place in Venezuela. We applaud the Venezuelan people for their participation in the July 28th presidential election. We commend their courage.
And remember that real quickly. We're going to go to what Kamala will say in a minute. And they play this, we commend the people for voting, or we stand with the Venezuelan people. Well, you could mean that in any way you want, meaning that we stand with what we pretend they voted for, which isn't Maduro, or we stand with what they actually voted for, which is Maduro. By saying that, you could go either way. My point is, we'll get to in a second, Kamala put out what seems to contradict what everybody else in the administration is saying, a statement that's being interpreted to say you support Maduro. But all it really says is we support what the Venezuelans voted for. And what you're going to find out is they're telling you they voted for somebody other than Maduro. But it's being used so the right can say, see, the left supports Maduro. It's not the reality, guys. The point I'm going to get to is right now, the right is supporting the candidate that Biden's administration is endorsing. While the narrative is something completely different, because they need you to think they're fighting the bad Democrats. But the reality is they're all supporting the same things.
Courage and commitment to democracy for their participation in the July 28th presidential election. We commend their courage and commitment to democracy in the face of repression and in the face of adversity. We've seen the announcement just a short while ago by the Venezuelan Electoral Commission. We have serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people.
Right. According to their people, right? Literally everybody else says the opposite. Even parts of the opposition say the opposite. Not the opposition they control, of course, which is why that makes sense. But they're talking about their individual groups that they use to dictate, like a group like the OAS. But if you ask any of the international observers or any of the groups that are part of the local version of what they're talking about, or even the ones that aren't part of that country, but not part of the United States apparatus, groups that are there for this very purpose to kind of on a global level observe elections, they're all saying it was accurate. We'll get into more of this and question it. Don't take my word for it. I could certainly be wrong. The point is that the evidence, as always, clearly goes against what they're trying to tell you for their own interests. Surprise, surprise.
It's critical that every vote be counted fairly and transparently, that election officials immediately share information with the opposition and independent observers without delay.
That's important. This is the same thing they did with Bolivia. There's a reason, as we can show, it's already been acknowledged that these sometimes, for example, there's lots of rural areas where there are things that take a minute to end up coming through, and they then immediately pounce on that and go, they're paused. They're not letting any information to shut everything down. And then it comes out a little bit later. And they just pretend that's what actually happened. So that's why he mentioned that. Because at this point, they're saying most of them stood up and said these things before it had even finished, because they already knew the narrative. And I already told you before, they were saying that we're not, I think it was from Ecuador, was saying we're not going to abide by the election results because they already saw the writing on the wall. They already knew that Maduro was going to win. If their person won, they would have been great. We won. Good. That's the way it goes. That's democracy for you, right? But of course, coming out ahead of time before the votes are even tallied and saying that we won't abide by it, that's supposed to be democracy? Like, this is the stupid nature of, if you want to get into the left-right dynamic, and trust me, it's the government, it's not one side or the other, but to get into it for a point, it's like the left saying that, Trump's doing this, except it's only he's breaking democracy, so we have to break democracy to save democracy. It's childishly stupid. But again, I argue that that's the play to get you to think that one versus the other, and the end game amounts to the same. No matter what side you're siding with, it amounts to them using that to reimagine.
And that the electoral authorities publish the detailed tabulation of votes. The international community is watching this very closely and will respond accordingly.
Yeah, they've watched and they've already told you it's all good, and you don't agree with that, so you make things up. This is what happens every single time. But here's something funny. What happened to this guy? Remember this ridiculous person? Juan Guaido? Yeah, weren't we told incessantly that he was the president, that he was the rightful president? That never stopped. There's still people that actually stupidly say that. So if he's actually the president, did we just give up on that? That's not even part of the conversation. Shouldn't that be relevant if you think he's actually still because that was never the case. That's how embarrassing this was when they just dropped him. And even worse, when it got to a point to where they actually needed oil from Venezuela. And so they just made a deal with Maduro and said, yeah, Guaido, sorry, we're done with you. So what that shows you is either, as always, like the point they make with Somalia and others like that, or Sudan, the Sudan. In this case, it's that, well, okay, that means either that you don't care that he's actually the president because you need something from Maduro, or he was never the president and you are admitting that because you need something from Maduro now. The Sudan's the point about normalization. Forever, they've been saying they're a state sponsor of terrorism. But they said, hey, if you normalize with Israel, we'll take you off the list. Nothing actually changed. So again, the point is they were either never terrorists and they used that to coerce them to join with Israel, or they just didn't care they were terrorists because they joined with Israel. It's so obvious if you just think this stuff through. This is what it's like to lie about everything. Their own narratives trap them. So here's Mr. Juan Guaido, the only president that's supposed to exist and a threat to our democracy if we don't do it. And oh, wait, we need something. Shut up. Go away. It's embarrassing. And it should be because these people are ridiculous. Where were we? I lost my place. Oh, I guess that's where we're coming back to this. Let me close some of these real quick. So the point here that I haven't even said yet, that I've briefly mentioned. So everyone take note that the right, and I would argue the Republicans and the Team Smart Politics side of this, have aligned themselves with the same candidate that the Biden administration also backs in Venezuela, despite the framing being exact opposite. Now, how do you make sense of that? If the whole game is that we're fighting the socialist bad guy and the Democrats are fighting to impose socialism everywhere, except the Biden administration's backing the other person, the person that you're backing, that you claim is fighting socialism. And in reality, that's not even the best way to describe what's going on there. There's definite overlaps. My opinion is it's all bad. Government is bad, in my opinion. I think the socialism is just the same as any other thing you could talk about. It ultimately can be centralized at the top. What do you think we're living through right now? That's what happens. It doesn't make the point is that it's any level, it's government or powerful people will always try to manipulate their presence, their situation to benefit themselves. This narrative that it's only communism, it leads to some kind of problematic situation. It's a political narrative like everything else. Frankly, I don't think it's any more likely than anything else. That's my opinion, just because we've focused on these things historically. I also think there's an overlap, and this is not pro-socialism. Again, I don't support that. But my point is that you can see there are levels of these things that very clearly can benefit their people, as opposed to taking everything from them and claiming you're doing things for them, which is what your government does all over the world. But it's just the same in reverse if you want to say they could put them in that position and then put them, like, this is where you can get to the point of starvation and the conversation of that, where everyone's like a Soviet Union kind of conversation, right? The point is that clearly you can see how any of these things could end up in those positions if it's powerful people that choose to benefit themselves instead of you. But you can also look at positions where sometimes it's more so to the one side or more in the middle. Something like Libya, for example, where they were giving free healthcare and free education, but there was also plenty of problems. But it had the highest quality of life in all of Africa before they destroyed it because they wanted what they wanted. It has nothing to do with saving anybody. My point is we got to get away from these childish, like these naive perceptions that it's the one thing they say. The government is the one manipulating you, so you do what they want. So my point here is they're trying to pretend this is the one good one, the one bad one. They're all supporting the same thing, hoping you don't pay attention. Kindly, Achia points this out, and prior to the results, Going Underground was highlighting that the person that lost, Maria Corina Machado, has said, if we win, well, we'll move the Venezuelan embassy to Jerusalem and support Israel. There's a reason. It's obvious what's going on here, guys. Every U.S.-backed Latin American politician tends to be fanatically pro-Israel and pro-genocide in Gaza. Why do you think that is? That's Going Underground. That's the name of the account, by the way. Here's another example. Here's Cat Turd saying, picture of the election being stolen in Venezuela last night. And it's that image that we've seen from the election. They're claiming the Democrats were hiding this and that, which they were. So was the Republicans. The Democrats cheat every single time as far back as I can look. That's the reality. We just like to be selective on what we show because of partisan narratives. My point is that, so this is supposed to be you suggesting that the Democrats are somewhere, or at least that what they're doing is the same as the Democrats. Okay. He says, oh, wait, that's the Democrats stealing the election in 2020. And I simply said, do you not realize that you're backing the same Venezuelan candidate as the Biden administration? And it's funny how few people wanted to comment on that. Oops. That's an uncomfortable reality, right? Well, here's Matt Miller saying the same thing. Blinken said today it's critical that every vote be fairly transparent. Oh, it already happened. It's already over. Too late. They just undermine what's happening like they've done every single far back as you can look. They've been doing this, especially in Venezuela. And under that comment where I said, do you realize you're backing the same candidate, or whatever that is, however that's pronounced, says the Biden admin is putting up a front. Ah, okay. Now it's the whole 40 chess dynamic. Which is certainly possible. The people of Venezuela wanted Maria. That's not true. I think it's easy to prove. Or anything other than Maduro. Also, very shockingly obvious to show. That's why Maduro, the opposite is true. That's why Maduro stealing the election will have nothing happen to them from the Biden administration. Right, because the Biden administration is supposed to be the one handing out accountability to people that are they're not the world police, guy. It's weird how you act like you're fighting against the thing you claim there are, but then endorse the idea that we're supposed to be the ones sort of controlling what other countries do. The bottom line is that's not true, no matter how you spin it. I said incorrect. That's a nice story, though, designed to make sure you don't reflect on the reality of what we're saying right here, that you're backing the same candidate. The idea that you just go, no, we're not, they're just lying about it. Well, that's not true. Look at what they're doing. Their policy that goes well back before the even Biden administration. Your government supports anything but Maduro. They support whoever they put in power that will interest them, that will gain them what they want, socialist or otherwise. That's the truth. And so here's the interesting anomaly to this, or at least how it's being presented. Here's what Kamala Harris put out. This is yesterday at 5 p.m. The United States stands with the people of Venezuela, who expressed their voice in today's historic presidential election. The will of the Venezuelan people must be respected. Despite the many challenges, we will continue to work toward a more democratic, prosperous, and secure future for the people of Venezuela. Well, yeah, that's a very Trump style answer, right down the middle, letting everybody read into what they want it to mean. Very political. But you get Elon Musk sharing what Gunther says. The United States will become Venezuela if Trump's not elected. You keep getting all these ridiculous hyperbolic claims. Trump said that at the Bitcoin conference, by the way, something to the effect of if we don't win, it'll be the end of this country. This is driving the kind of civil war mindset, especially if you pretend he's sent by God. You combine those things, you are driving people to take action. Now, it's not just the right. It's the two-party illusion, but it is radicalizing people. Now, that's not the same as people out there challenging narratives. My point is the actual level of these, and I think conservatives and liberals are starting to see it, are in fact very much driving the very thing they're pointing at to justify all of our suppression, all of our censorship. For you to come out and say that we have to stop this or this is going to happen, it's the mindset is people that act irrationally. It's the same as the left calling Trump Nazi or Hitler or whatever. You then get them to put, if you think the assassination attempt was what it looks like, that's what would happen. Somebody who convinces themselves this is going to save the world because of false narratives. So if he stands up and says, if Iran assassinates me, better flatten the country. It's like, these are dangerous things to say. Or that if I don't win, that the end of the country is going to happen. That's dangerous and irresponsible. And frankly, I don't agree with that. I think they're all the same. I think whoever gets elected, it was the plan and you're all being manipulated by your government. But I know that's not what everyone wants to hear. But they tagged the vice Kamala Harris tweet saying that. So what they're insinuating is that, well, she means that she's siding with Maduro. And he says, I think the risk of this is very real. Oh, you added so much there. The point is that obviously it's about trying to suggest that they're supporting the opposite of what we are, and they're fighting against the freedom and liberty we're all trying to create. Okay, we'll go back to what she said. You could read that either way. The United States stands with the people of Venezuela. Well, you just heard Blinken say that is, or in a number of elements other than Blinken, like Rubio and everyone else we'll get to, they're straight up saying that the people don't want Maduro. We just heard that guy say that. Why? Because he knows. No, because he's repeating what somebody on the right said. They're not in Venezuela. They don't know. And I'm not either. But We have all sorts of people we can connect with. We have research we can show you, and maybe they do too. Look into what his account says. The reality is, when you actually dive into this, the evidence is very clear. Very clear. And their track record is also very clear. And we'll get into that as well, of admitting that they knew what they did before was going to hurt people, knowing that this is regime change based on, the coup attempts. These are public. They used to be conspiracy theory. So why are we going to pretend like only one side now is not going to do that? As I said in the last show, the right is going to make regime change great again. But what she's saying here is right down the middle. Standing with the people of Venezuela who express their voice. Well, to a lot of people, that means for not Maduro. I mark my words. My prediction is that this will end up becoming, we don't support Maduro. It's possible it can go the other way. Things are weirdly changing right now because, like, for instance, pretending like you're against Israel, even though we know they're not, they take AIPAC money and so on. They might throw a bone to some of the people in their side that think that that know that genocide is being committed, and they think that they're trying to stop it, but they're not really. So this may end up where you kind of leave that and pretend like you don't support the other guy and just never talk about it again. But trust me, if you actually look at their policy, and I'll show you her other statements, they don't support Maduro, guys. They support whatever they need to get what they want. Here is just a couple of her past statements. This is from 2019. What's happening in Venezuela is a crisis. The people who have fled Maduro's dictatorial regime, yeah, clearly she supports him, right? Deserve safety and protection. As president, I would immediately extend the Venezuelan status. This is about immigration and so on. It's all an agenda, guys. It is all clear. Weaponized migration is a real thing, but they're also causing it. So it's not one side or the other. It's your government doing this to manipulate you. Hey, digital IDs will solve it, right? Here's what else. She said this in 2019 as well. The U.S. must immediately condemn Maduro's violence against his own people. Come on. The reality is that they're all on the same side. I'm going to predict, but it's not solid or certain, I would say, but I'm going to predict that you're going to find that this statement will end up going the other way. But by that point, it won't matter. Now, here is in that same conversation where I said you're supporting the same as the Biden administration. This person said, I only care about which one will make oil cheaper. That's great. But it's hard, he says, to look at the election results, the graph, and not think it's something very shady akin to 2020, which, by the way, was exactly the point. Part of the way you're being played, because they know you're thinking the same thing as 2020. Why? Because that's what keeps being put in front of you by all these million-follower accounts. Think 2020, think Democrats, think stolen election. And then what do you know? Weirdly, that's what you start to think. Just like Jones was telling you. Maybe he was telling you exactly what they always do. The bottom line is that this is what they did in Bolivia. It's what they manipulate graphs, they manipulate outcomes, they lie about the circumstances, and they push in the midst of something that you don't understand. Here's some breakdowns on this that might explain more. Manilo de Luz Santos says, threat on Venezuela election results. The U.S. government plan for Venezuela's election, and this is just his opinion, take it for what you will, all along was to generate a fraud and crisis by creating false and unreliable exit polls to deceive people and global public opinion into thinking the far-right opposition had a 40% lead. Now, just whether you think this is what happened now, I don't know how anybody can dispute that that's what they've already done. I mean, even people on the right at this point are calling out, based on something I'll show you, the admissions, which I think are designed sort of like a controlled demolition point while hiding other facts, admitting that these past coups were destructive and that they were coups and they blah, blah, blah. We're going to show you. But the point is that we know they've done this. They know they've lied about the outcomes. They've pretended to deliver aid and it was really barbed wire and wood. So they could then blame it on the other side. That's what they do. And that was during a Republican. One of them was during Trump's administration, for sure. That's 2020. But it goes on to say, before the polls even closed, which by Venezuelan law only close when the last person online gets to vote, U.S. politicians and their Latin American allies started demanding vote results be respected and prematurely declaring victory for the far-right opposition. And really quickly to clarify, my point in saying 2020, basically Trump's administration came up, and I'll play you a quote from him saying the same, where the agenda, the starvation campaign, all through Trump's administration. And then it tag teamed into Biden's, which is the same thing that happens every time, just like COVID-19. He goes on to say, as soon as Venezuela's actual election authorities announced the first results, the opposition cried fraud without any evidence or facts. Also, always what happens. This is the same voting system that has allowed for members of the opposition to win other elections in recent years. Venezuela has a record for over 20 years for having one of the world's most transparent election systems. That is the reality. You can look up outside of Western apparatus media. That's pretty commonly pointed out. Even people like what's his name, the past president Jimmy Carter, I said some similar things. It says the only one where 54% of its votes are immediately audited. Now, the Western media, billionaires like Elon Musk and the U.S. government all come together to label Maduro a dictator. These were free and fair elections with higher voter turnout despite over a decade of cruel U.S. sanctions. Higher turnout than we see in this country, guys, that have crippled the Venezuelan economy and sought to overthrow an elected government. Nicolas Maduro has been reelected. The will of the Venezuelan people has been respected. Any claims of fraud in these elections must be substantiated with actual evidence and facts, not prefabricated CIA talking points. The people have spoken for the revolution is won. The point, that's what I think makes this make more the standing. What you're going to hear from like a lot of the partisan narratives. And right now you got the people like Elon on the right screaming, dictator, they stole it. Okay, well, back it up. Where's your evidence other than graphs and polls that you can prove are inaccurate? The point is that what he's saying is, if you're going to say this, then put up evidence instead of just coming out and saying, that's not true, you're a liar. This is what happened, which you get these forceful statements from people within this conversation. He's simply saying, look, where's the evidence? Let's discuss this. That is what an objective person does. Now, here is one of the examples of the person. This is what he was talking about. So this was yesterday. And this is according to, and this was one of these opposition, I argue not on the side of the people of Venezuela. They spoke up from the opposition parties and said the National Electoral Council in Venezuela has halted the transmission of vote count data and is preventing opposition party witnesses from accessing the voting records, removing them from polling locations. Oh, nope, that was actually fake. Fake video, and the narrative was about a time where they were waiting for other information, which later came. This has been backed up by plenty of people who are talking about it. But of course, they shoved this in the conversation before things had ended. That's exactly what he's talking about. That's what they do. And this person does the same thing. I'll just put this here. Don't forget about 2020. Don't forget about the Democrats in the election. You're being socially engineered. Guys, you're being played. Marco Rubio steps into the conversation and says, after announcing a complete fraud of the election, this is late yesterday, except the Maduro regime will now begin to black. Oh, no, he goes, again, this is important. After announcing a complete fraud of the election, expect the Maduro regime will now begin to black out the internet inside Venezuela to make it difficult for those inside to communicate with each other and the world. You should remember that because he's almost verbatim said that before. Before that, here's what Jen's ex-girl says, rinse and repeat. Bolivia, hey, Marco. Here's Vaz, the same thing. Here's Visegrad 24. The Maduro regime stops counting the votes. The webpage of the national, this is the same things they put out, the same narratives that are, you can look back now, are flimsy, false, or misinformation that later, like the point would be, like we'll show you in a second, pulling other data from places that take them in and then it ends up following up later. Now, of course, question that. Look into it. If you think they lied, you think they're cheating, find the evidence for it. Having a pause in this while things are happening, which is what's happened in Bolivia, for example. They lied about it. And we now know for a fact, based on things like an MIT study that proved they lied about it, that they did manipulate the Bolivian election. This is the point. This goes back to, Melissa says, that's what the OAS Lima group said about the Bolivian vote count as they were awaiting votes from distant rural areas. That was just before the U.S. coup stepped in and the violence was wrought on the population. That's what they do, guys. The point is, don't forget, she's citing something that was already proven to be false. Because that's what you do. Now here, and we're going to get into the Rubio part. Actually, I thought this was, shoot, I guess it's way down here, actually. We're going to come back to that. Don't remember that point about the internet being turned off, because he said this before. The point is that you're already seeing that now. And he did the same thing in 2019, and it happened literally the same time he said that. Now, of course, you could argue that's just what they're doing, but I think it's pretty conspicuous to say, he's about to do the thing, and then Maduro goes, oh, okay, and does the thing. Like, that just seems pretty stupid. But Casey Wright coming into the today conversation, Nicolas Maduro has officially been named the winner of the Venezuelan presidential election. Now, lots of these countries have refused to recognize the results officially, and then even more, though, have officially recognized the results. 51% to 44% was the final. Alan McLeod highlights what the New York Times is saying. Venezuela's autocrat is declared winner in tainted election. Yeah, very unbiased. Like, it's just so obvious that they have a mandate. He says the reason elections in Venezuela are, quote, tainted is because the, quote, wrong person won, beating the U.S.-backed candidate, which is what you see everywhere. And it's not left or right candidate, guys. It's the U.S. government candidate. The U.S. has had, quote, serious concerns with every Chavista victory since the year 2000. Why should we care what a country that has supported many coups against this country think? Or the ongoing supporting of genocide? Like, they don't have any moral standing anywhere. Rania Collect says this is a lie. The New York Times is lying to cast doubt on the election of a socialist leader they do not like. Over 800 international election observers across Venezuela saw a transparent and efficient process. Over 800 international election observers. You realize how many, I mean, we're talking about people from different countries, from different backgrounds, from different political standings, who are all independently there observing, and 800 of them. Not irregularities, as the New York Times says. They saw a transparent and efficient process. Even voters in opposition areas, as I mentioned earlier, have expressed satisfaction with the process. Just not the specific opposition that the U.S. government is backing and Israel's backing. I wonder why. Fiorella Isabel breaks down. I'm not going to go through this now, but this, in case you want to go through this, she very specifically and technologically breaks down the process of what they use in these elections. And as Pasta would say, this is exactly what we should be doing versus the digital ID direction they're taking you in, which is what they're pushing based on illegal voting and all. We should be going paper ballots and ballot-to-ballot confirmation. That, I mean, it's right now, there's obvious ways they're cheating this. And I mean, as Pasta's spoken to himself, where you can go to these places in other countries that have, less, to some degree, less population, but they see these things get finished, counted, verified one day. We're getting weeks and months sometimes. It's embarrassing, and it's meant to manipulate. It is designed so they can all cheat and manipulate the process. And I don't mean the voting, guys, because you know my opinion on that. It is about a lot of other things happening. And you could even argue, maybe I'm wrong in the case of different levels of voting. The lower vote, I argue, from local levels. If anything could have an effect, that would be the case. But again, I always get pulled into that. We'll talk about that much more, probably right around when this is beginning to happen. But she says, before calling fraud on Venezuela's elections, read this. I've covered elections in the U.S., in Latin America, Russia. This can be a bit techie, but I'll explain the electoral process step by step. It's important to know if you want to go through this and understand the process. Now, here is from Zero Hedge. Maduro declared Venezuelan president for third term, but opposition claims victory is stolen. Just like we're going to see in this country as soon as this happens. Venezuela's opposition claimed Gonzalez defeated President Nicolas Maduro in Sunday's presidential election, setting up a showdown with the government, which earlier declared Maduro the winner. Now, apparently, Machado is like the stand-in for him. It's weird. Everything about what they do seems manipulated, in my opinion. But ultimately, it says some regional and external governments have signaled that they will not recognize Maduro's win. All eyes will also be on Washington Monday, waiting to see how forcefully the U.S. administration condemns the outcome. Why does that make sense? Meanwhile, an interesting recent administrative revelation, what Aaron Mate points out. But it's like everyone just can't stop acknowledging that it's okay that you think that there's somehow the policeman of the world. Why does the U.S. have any say on any of this? It's a good question, isn't it? But here's what Aaron Mate pointed out. This is very important. It's what we've been highlighting around this conversation for as far back as you can look. That's not just John Bolton, by the way, but they do not care about the people that they claim they're trying to do this to benefit. He writes, ahead of Venezuela's election, John Bolton admitted to the Washington Post that he knew that the Trump administration's crippling sanctions and coup attempt against Venezuela would destroy its economy and force millions to flee. You know, all the millions they later used the migration the caravan. Yeah, well, we told you then, and you probably still won't want to hear it, despite Bolton admitting it, that was manufactured by the very people you claim were trying to stop the Democrats from doing it. Oops. The point is, all of them are doing it, but this was the administration that you claim was trying to fight against that. The point is, it says there was no doubt the sanctions, along with the general economic deterioration, before we imposed them, meaning he's also admitting that it wasn't Venezuela's fault they were starving and suffering. They made this happen, which again, anybody with a brain could see that. And all the lies they spun, eating the zoo animals and all these things, that was a lie. It was a proven lie. Abby Martin was the one that broke that down, showing you that the people that were stealing some of these things were small, expensive animals that they were selling overseas. Had nothing to do with stealing animals to eat them because they were starving. They were in those positions because the U.S. government was starving all of them. And then they manufactured all these lies to try to convince you that it was because Maduro was doing it. But it says they were driving a lot of people out of the country. He says that to me was a way to put pressure on the country. So you don't care about Venezuelans if what you're doing is hurting Venezuelans to pressure Maduro, which, by the way, that's what sanctions are designed to do. Hurt average people so they force their government to take action. If you don't think that, look back at our history. They've written this stuff down. So right now, when they sanction anybody, in the sense of where it's affecting the average people, they know what they're doing. People like that should not even be allowed to have this statement of somehow acting in the interest of freedom or human rights, when all they do is stand all over those things. They ruin, they use them against people. He says, did any Venezuelans vote for John Bolton, Aaron writes, Donald Trump, or Joe Biden, who initially continued the Trump policy to destroy their economy? Does Trump, who constantly rails against undocumented immigrants, ever take responsibility for knowingly creating millions of them? It's a good question, isn't it? I'm sure the right will ignore it. Those are pertinent questions as we address the sincerity and credibility of bipartisan U.S. establishment figures who will now question Venezuela's election and denounce Maduro as an autocrat. To me, he says, there's nothing more autocratic than trying to impoverish a foreign country and install a new government there. Again, if you're hearing this as a partisan narrative, it's not. Both sides of your government, or all of your government, are the ones responsible for this. And they use these partisan narratives to keep you fighting each other. Here is what Megatron posted of Senator Chris Murphy. Now, in this statement, I think this is meant to be a sort of controlled demolition, where you're admitting very dangerous things about what's happened before in a way to make Murphy seem like he's standing out as the truth teller, but he's also telling you a lot of lies in here. For example, arguing they were bringing in humanitarian aid. They were not. They were caught with empty trucks full of barbed wire, and they were trying to throw Molotov cocktails at them to blame Maduro, and it got in real time exposed as being Guaido doing it, which meant the U.S. government and Israel. But here are important statements nonetheless. He says, we tried to construct a coup in Venezuela. That was supposed to be a fake story. That was supposed to be conspiracy theory. We got censored back then for talking about stuff like this.
I feel like it's Groundhog Day in this committee. We've been told by the administration, frankly, multiple administrations for years, that Russia's support for Assad and Iran's support for Assad is tepid. It's fragile. It's just a matter of time before he falls. The truth of the matter is they were always willing to do more than we were in Syria to protect their interests, and that is likely the exact same case here in Venezuela. And so our policy has been misguided by fundamentally flawed assumptions from the beginning. And I have deep respect for both of you who are testifying before this committee, but we just have to be clear that our Venezuela policy over the last year and a half has been an unmitigated disaster. And if we aren't honest about that, then we can't self-correct. We have to admit that our big play, recognizing Guaido right out of the gate and then moving quickly to implement sanctions, just didn't work. It didn't. All it did was...
Yeah, and it was also shockingly illegal. That's the point. Recognizing Guaido in what standing? And how in the world is unilaterally recognizing someone who doesn't even have position to be there democracy? Like, so just make sure you're recognizing how ridiculous this is and realize that and he's not addressing any of that, that they do this all the time. And now this is trying to use a little bit of this to open you, to make you think that you're getting in from, they're using this to trap you in the next thing. The only time, in my opinion, you get this kind of information from the government is when they're using it to pull you into something new. Just recognize that. They lied to you about what they did. They destroyed this country, and that's why people support Maduro. Because they know what is going on. And most of the world does today. It's wildly transparent. You know who are the least informed about what the U.S. government is doing? People trapped in the two-party illusion. The world seems to know more than anybody else because they're living through it.
pardon Russia and Cuba's play in Venezuela and allow Maduro to paint Guaido as an American patsy.
Because he was. I mean, you literally just said that you plucked him out of obscurity and made him the president, but they painted him as a patsy. He is, guys. That's what he is. And that's why he was just as easily dropped. If he was the real thing, you guys would be talking about him as supposed to be in power.
And a lot of us warned that this might happen. We could have used the prospect of U.S. recognition or sanctions as leverage. We could have spent more time trying to get European allies and other partners on the same page. We could have spent more time trying to talk to or neutralize China and Russia early before we backed them into a corner.
Think about what we're even talking about in some kind of casual way, like you're doing the right thing. You're the measured, measured response. You're talking about illegal actions. You're talking about coercive movements by saying we'll threaten sanctions and threaten act. And that's what he's talking about. In order to get what you want. Is that democracy? Are any of those things amounting to what the Venezuelan people want? You're talking about going against China and Russia. What does that have to do with Venezuelan people? I understand that those countries also have interest in a lot of stuff that's going on there, but I'm not aware of any regime change efforts or occupation or any efforts like we've seen in every other country you've done. They're making deals with Venezuela, sure, and I guarantee they're in the interest of themselves more than anybody else, but it's being done by choice. And yes, I know that threatens your U.S. preeminence and the idea that you need to constantly be battling for who controls the world. That's not what anybody else wants from you. That's what you guys want for yourselves. So painting it like this is grotesque. You're painting it like you're somehow good do-gooder out there trying to save the situation when all you're highlighting is illegal action.
From which they are not moving. They are not moving. But all we did was play all our cards on day one. And it didn't work.
Yeah, the typical belligerent response from just Trump or Biden, it's your government, coming out with immediate flat. I mean, realistically, all the things we've heard about the Soviet Union in the past, that they have to demonstrate strength, and it's all about that. That's what this government is today, in that one sense, but a lot of those as well. You have to think about what that shows you. If you look back, I've said this so many times. How is it even possible that we can look at all the supposed regime change for democracy? They're batting zero, guys. They have destroyed every single country they claimed they were liberating. What they say about Iraq, they'd welcome us as liberating heroes. Yeah, that didn't work. It's destroyed. Syria, Afghanistan, Bolivia, Libya. Venezuela is not occupied, but sure as hell being destroyed. Guys, this is what they do. And my point is, that's not the accident. That's the point. But let's keep letting them try because they're clearly good guys, right?
And it's just been an embarrassing mistake after mistake since. First, we thought that getting Guaido to declare himself president would be enough
to declare himself president. Oh, this is so stupid.
Topple the regime. Then we thought putting aid on the border would be enough.
Yeah, you mean the barbed wire and wood that you pretended was aid so you could create a false flag and fail to blame it on Maduro.
Then we tried to sort of construct a kind of coup in April of last year, and it blew up in our face when all the generals that were supposed to break with Maduro decided to stick with him in the end.
Yep, and that was a really embarrassing one because remember we talked about that. That's showing you how inept they were. Like they got played. And sort of like we saw with Russia, Ukraine, they don't have the influence they pretend they do. They still have a hell of a lot of influence. But my point is they've lost the ability. Like we watched that play out where they basically allowed this to go forward. They played the U.S. government. They thought they were going to take over, and then all of a sudden, the generals just stayed with Maduro. You just admitted openly to carrying out an illegal coup, attempted a coup. That's a crime, guys. Just because it happens all the time doesn't mean it's not a very clear international crime. They don't care. They're doing it again.
We undermined Norway's talks last summer, and then this March, we released a transition framework that frankly is almost a carbon copy of the very one that was in front of the parties last year.
Right. That's all he's saying is, even though all of that, even though destruction, terror, incompetence, failure, here, let's do it again. Same thing. Propose the same. You know why? Because despite all of those terrible words he just listed off, or what I'm saying he's saying, which is what he's saying, but I put specific words on it. Despite all of that, despite him framing it as a failure, they made a hell of a lot of money. Selling weapons, and I mean, any number of other things, legislation that was passed because of the threat, the migration. I mean, that's what these things ultimately come down to. Now, yes, there was an agenda about actually taking control of Venezuela, But within all of that, they're just going to go through the motions again. That's what's happening. And he just straight up told you that. Sort of like revelation of the method, or any number of things you could argue. They're just telling you what's happening. Now, here's Marco Rubio, and that's what I was showing you earlier, saying that get ready for Maduro to turn off the internet. Well, here's why this is ridiculous. And Marco Rubio is always one of the first people screaming about Venezuela. I said, gee, I wonder if this prescient prediction I wonder if after this prescient prediction, he might, take action to take down their internet and then blame it on Maduro. What do you think? Which is exactly what happened during the last coup attempt. These people just seem to repeat the same few plays over and over. Well, guess what? Casey Wright saw the same thing. Marco Rubio could have copied and pasted his tweet from 2019. The only difference is getting a ton more reach in 2024. It actually looks like he was being shadow banned in 2019, but he's being amplified today. Here's 2019. Tomorrow in Venezuela, expect Maduro to cut off the internet. This is January 22nd. Well, guess what happened? In January 2019, various social media sites suffered brief blackouts in Venezuela. A few points, the entire internet went down. And what'd they do? They said, Maduro, shutting it down. That's not what happened. This is retroactively, you can see they made this happen. They attacked them. They suppressed them. Even just in one sense, just the financial sanctions caused some of this to happen. The point is, it's wildly conspicuous for him to point at it, and then that made the same thing happen. Yeah, well, he must be psychic or something, right? Here, this is the article from 2019. All the countries that were somehow managed to shut down their entire internet, right? Because it was their fault, right? Or they did it. No, it's the same thing happening again. And now here he does it again. Get ready for the internet to go down. And then what do you know? Oops, internet starts to go down in Venezuela. The next day, it's like they can't, at least he waited a few days last time. Right now, the very next day, despite all the evidence showing the opposite, they are trying to manufacture the illusion to make it look like okay, now here's what's going to happen. They're going to say that the internet went down. Now they changed everything. They altered all the results, and now we can't see. Well, guess what? We're not dealing with a digital election like we deal with in this country. But that narrative is going to be out there. Mark my words. Either way, they're manufacturing the setup to make it look like they're trying to steal something because they're desperate to take control of this. And the lithium, and the oil, and the gold, and everything else. Dan Cohen discusses Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz says, what is happening in Venezuela right now could be historic. It must teach us a lesson among many. You can typically vote your way into socialism, but you have to fight your way out. See how this works? Only about the one thing they're highlighting because it catches the attention of the conservative, the Republicans that are blinded by this and nothing else, and driving you into the idea that now they need to fight their way out. It was an election observed by 800 plus international observers who have confirmed that it's legitimate. And it's obvious to anybody with a brain and eyes that most people support Maduro in that country. The guy walks around in places publicly without any control. Just people sweep. It's crazy. You have never seen a U.S. politician do any of the things you see people like Assad or Maduro do. That's not to say that proves what we're talking about. But I'm telling you right now, they wouldn't even pretend to do that. These people are so terrified of us that they hide behind big walls and metal fences and keep you with people at distance with Secret Service because they know you hate them. Here's what Dan said. Today, Matt Gaetz is trying to destabilize Venezuela. Tomorrow, he'll complain there's a Venezuelan migration crisis on our border. See how that works? Just like before, when John Bolton admits that they knew what they would do was going to drive massive people out of their country. And then they turned around and said, see, this is what they're doing. This is the fault of the Democrats or whatever the point is at the moment to get you divided. He says he's either too dense to understand cause and effect, or he's doing it intentionally. I would argue the latter. Let Venezuela choose its own path and stop interfering with its sovereign democratic process. If Venezuela is allowed to prosper instead of suffocate under sanctions, the migration flow will naturally reverse. That's quite obvious. But it's too much of a wedge issue now. So they're using human lives, just like we see over and over and over. And it will materialize with biometric checkpoints, digital IDs, possibly even vaccine passports. And don't say, you don't, I won't, I mean, I probably will, but I would say, I won't say I told you so when it happens. Hopefully there's enough conservatives out there who are open-minded enough to see this, or liberals for that matter. But this is right now, this whole thing I feel is being aimed specifically at the Republicans. Now here is just a thread from the poll lady. I just want to make sure you saw this. Don't forget that this is what Trump said. All these people that kept screaming about, or continue to scream about how he never started new wars, which is just a manipulation. Clearly, as he even said in the recent speech at the Bitcoin conference, that he finished them all. Like that's any better. It's ridiculous to even say that like it's a proud moment. But and by the way, he didn't, because most of them are still happening. Even Afghanistan, there's still people on the ground despite all the lies. The point is that Soleimani being assassinated obviously could have spun out into a massive war. It just didn't. It was a massive war crime. But what he did in Venezuela just as easily could have become a massive war. And here's what he said, which shows you that they wouldn't have been averse to that.
We're buying oil from Venezuela. When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door. But now we're buying oil from Venezuela, so we're making a dictator very rich. Can you believe this? Nobody can believe it. You know where the oil, their oil is garbage. It's horrible.
Yeah. Oh, they got the bad oil. This is so stupid. But the point is, ultimately, he's admitting this, that we should have just taken it. Like we said with Syria, we're going to go in Syria and take the oil. Those are crimes, guys. No matter how you spin this, those are crimes. Even if Maduro's actually a dictator, it's still a crime. It is still a crime to just occupy and destabilize and sanction to steal their resources. It's just so on the surface today. And the sad part is a lot of people trapped in the paradigm are just choosing not to care. Again, that's team sport politics. They're just like, shut up, you woke softy. We only care about oil and freedom and beer and meat or whatever the dumb things they say over here. It's only about the extreme opposite, right? We're over here, we care like to the point where everyone has to get what they want and everybody can choose their gender and all these, they're both ridiculous cartoons of what we should be. That's the point. It's always happening. But just listen to him when he tells you what he is, what all of them are. Now, I'm going to include these for you to read. This was actually when we were at the time posting a lot of other people's work through Creative Commons. This was from antiwar.com, which, by the way, I just can't shout them out enough. I was just sharing some of their articles again yesterday or today. Amazing work. This one was Jason Ditz. Venezuela's Guaido seeks military aid for regime change. That was from Whitney Webb. Oh, no, that was Jason, excuse me. This one, I just said that. This one is here from Whitney. I'll get to it in a second, actually. So this is an important article telling you Guaido, just like what Charo's doing, Israel, we need regime change. We need everything. Well, same thing. He's reaching out to everybody else saying, help us, regime change. Nothing's new under the sun. Guys, here is Mike Pompeo, 2019, says regime change is also planned for Nicaragua and Cuba, not only Venezuela. He actually said that. It's going to be great again. Don't worry. Republicans are going to make regime change great again. And by the way, it's not a unique left-right thing. The left is doing just as much. The point is right now it's a different time. There's different focuses. With the ongoing genocide, it's a little bit difficult to get away with regime change, I would argue. The point is that if you look back through history, it's not unique to one side or the other. It surges in different points at different times. It's obvious at different times. But something like Afghanistan or Vietnam, they go through multiple administrations, left and right. It's always the same thing. I don't know how much more I can hammer that home. 2020. A massive COVID-19 cover-up is underway, and U.S. mercenaries caught in Venezuelan coup attempt. Remember this story? Sort of like we saw in Iran or in China or everywhere else, they're doing the same thing. They got caught. Nothing happened to them, of course, because they're on, they act with impunity around the world. Here, this one's written by Whitney Webb. 2020. Driven by the dramatic collapse of U.S. shale, the Trump administration takes aim at Venezuela. Same thing is going to happen again. Now, last few points on this. Anya Prampil points this out. Don't turn off your critical thinking skills just because you have been told Venezuela is socialist your whole life. The Venezuelan opposition have claimed fraud and contested virtually every election that they have lost since Chavez came to power. Yet they can never provide evidence. And that is because Venezuela's electoral process is far more secure, don't freak out now, than what we have in the United States. Frankly, I agree with that. It's not about Venezuela. It's about the fact that what we're dealing with here is ridiculous. And it's a growing reality that people are becoming aware of, whether it's the voting machines or just the straight up every side is constantly cheating. My point is, I don't even think your vote has any effect on the outcome. I 100% believe that. But whatever you think about Venezuela, realize that what we're dealing with, as people like Pasta have highlighted, is a system that's pretty easy to maintain. One person, one vote, paper ballots, checks, ballots. It's 1 day process. Obviously, anybody can cheat in any situation, but the reality seems to be this is more secure. That's why a lot of people in this country are asking you to go back to paper ballots. But it says, she says, I described the voting process in the country, which I have observed firsthand in my book. That's what she's saying. And the point is, you could question her motives, of course, question everybody. But these are people that have been there, that have watched it, that have researched it, not like people screaming about what they're experts on what the U.S. government says about these things. That's most of the intelligence conversation. And she says, quote, in Venezuela, from her book, voting machines were activated through a two-step verification process. That's what Isabella was breaking down, consisting of a physical check of the voter's national identity card and a digital scan of their fingerprint, which I don't want and I don't agree with, just to be clear, right? I'm not suggesting that we should do any of these things. I think it should go the other direction. But from a static point, the point is that these things are clearly more secure than what we're dealing with here. I want something different. I don't want any technological biometric overlap for any of this stuff. I don't know why anybody would, quite frankly. It says, after casting their vote, the voter received a physical receipt of their ballot, which they then personally dropped in a secure box on the site. Like, you get my point. That's clearly more secure. This is the way all this works usually. My point is that you end up pointing at one thing, and then the assumption becomes you support all of these different things. There's nuance in all of this stuff. It is possible to be able to highlight certain things without and being opposed to others. But it says the voter then signed their name on their thumbprint on a physical electoral registry to certify their participation. When the polls closed, authorities assuaged fears of digital vote tampering by checking their final electronic tally against the random sampling of 54% of the physical ballot. Citizen and international observers are present throughout the process. Do not fall for claims of fraud unless hard evidence is produced, especially because further escalation in Venezuela will only result in civil conflict and perhaps even regional war in the Western Hemisphere. And what will that do? Drive massive migration into the United States, which they probably want and they'll use to usher in everything we're talking about. It says, you think our border looks bad now? Wait until Washington turns up the heat on Caracas, Venezuela. Oh, she says, and the Russian military has strong military ties with Venezuela and a presence within the country. We are not only talking about a regional war here, but an expansion of the world war currently raging against Russia and its allied rising powers. Are you ready for that war to hit Washington's backyard? I don't think anybody is. I don't think the U.S. government is. One more point, she says, the vast majority of Venezuela's economy, hotels, restaurants, stores, are privately owned and operated. This sort of challenges this idea of what they claim this country is. Not entirely, because I'm not denying it in any way. This is a socialist country, but that's their party. But my point is that it's weird how that if you actually break down these things and compare it to, let's just say, the United States, it's interesting, the differences and the similarities. But it says, Venezuela's socialism is largely defined by the fact its industries, including its oil sector and precious minerals reserves, are nationally operated. This makes Venezuela comparable to Russia and many other modern states that consider the natural resources stored within a nation to be the property of the republic rather than a few at the top. Now, who would disagree with that? My point is the same, and this is what's going to get taken out of context by people that want to be dishonest. But the point is that in any situation, whether it's democracy, authoritarianism, socialism, communism, is that anybody who has dishonest intentions can manipulate that to condense power at the top. But in the same way, any one of them could benefit people if the people at the top have good intentions. I make that point about a monarchy. Like, I mean, if you want to be real about it, like in the sense that what might be the best benefit for the average person, and I'm not advocating for this. So let's just say hypothetically you had a king or a queen who, for sake of conversation, genuinely only wanted what's best for the people at the expense of themselves. Truly, which is a unicorn, doesn't exist. But let's just say that was the case. Wouldn't that be like the best case scenario? That person takes control of everything and they act in every way in the interest of you at their expense? Well, yes, but that's never going to happen. That's because the reality is, even if it was, the next person won't be the same. My point in saying that is it doesn't matter what you look at, top down, whatever. The point is, with good intentions and the people truly acting in the interest of the people in the interest of the people, well, that would be a positive thing with varying degrees of what you think is better or worse. My point in saying all of that is if you really think about this in the sense of not the entire idea of socialist governments and governance and, food credits and all the stuff that they scaremonger about, which are real things in the past. What we're talking about here is the idea of taking the assets of the country, which, by the way, is what the U.S. government is aiming at, what they'll take immediately for their expense at the expense of the people of Venezuela, the exact opposite of what we're talking about. And they claim, and they could be lying about it, and they could abuse it like any other form of governance, create a situation where those resources are used to benefit the people. And this is what we talked about in regard to Libya and the idea of free healthcare and free college. And one of the reasons why he was beginning to aim towards a gold-backed dinar, which is one of the reasons that this was he was taken out. But if you think that that's possible, and you have somebody who genuinely wants to, I would argue you could just easily do that and then also still completely benefit yourself at the expense of the people. Both can exist. Either way, as an average person, what would you want? Would you want to live in a place where we're dealing with what we're dealing with in this country? Lies, two-party illusion systems, complete, mass warp speed operations, forced injections, the illusion of what we pretend we have, or a place that's the exact opposite and, dark, the worst situations, or somewhere where it's, there's bad, there's good, but ultimately you have access to things like this. And there is a level of you get where I'm going with this. I don't support government. I know after saying all of that, it's hard to wrap your mind around, but I don't. I think government is the problem. But we're way far away from that conversation. I don't think most people don't even agree with that. We're still at the, who's going to build the roads conversation Corbett and I always laugh about. Yeah, we will. The same people that do now. The government is not the one doing. The government is simply pointing in your direction, and we do it. My point, though, is that I genuinely think that we can get to a point where we can understand that government top-down control in any sense is the problem. But since we're staring at these things and we're comparing, I argue that we're talking about something where if this is the reality and can be maintained and checked and balanced and whatever else, that yes, obviously, this is like saying Americans should benefit from all the sale of all of the resources we have in that country, which is not what happens. Wouldn't you want that? Wouldn't you want to be able to have free healthcare and free college and whatever else? Yeah, I think most people would. And that would be deemed socialism by the people that scream about everything that's not what they think we should have. The point comes down to the fact is that we shouldn't be talking about this at all. Americans, our government, should have no say over what Venezuelans want or vote for. Now, just because they want to say that this was a fraudulent election, maybe it was. It's still not the U.S. government's place to stick their fingers in and say, now we have to pick who's going to be in charge because we're totally not the policemen of the world, is what they always love to pretend. We don't want to dictate this and that, except we'll do that every chance we get. That's what they are. And guess what? They're not doing it for the interest of the Venezuelan people. She goes on to say, Venezuela is an obsession in Washington because before Chavez, U.S. and European companies practically owned the country, and the IMF set its domestic economic agenda. Venezuela is home to the largest oil and untapped gold reserves in the world. And lithium, as we showed you. This is why Americans have been inundated with propaganda about Venezuela since it began the process of asserting sovereign ownership over that natural wealth. Like any one of these countries, the moment they start saying, hey, why don't we benefit from this? Ask any African country. And that goes back way before the U.S. government, guys. It goes back to Britain and before the idea of taking these countries and benefiting from their resources at the expense of the people. I think this was a clip that we played. I think Jeffrey Sachs made this point. The idea simply being that when they do this, they force these countries to begin producing things that are what the U.S. government needs. They force them to be reliant on things the U.S. government then gives them, which in most cases are things they can produce for themselves. And they get in a situation where should the U.S. government want to, they can simply turn off the tap. Now you're screwed. You have to get what you need from them. Otherwise, your country collapses and they blame it on you. And all you're doing is producing things that the government needs for things outside of their country. And you slowly dwindle into poverty, which just makes it easier to control. This is what we're dealing with, guys. She says, this is why Americans have been inundated with this propaganda. That is what their socialism, in quotes, is primarily about. Now, I know that people that are blinded by the two-party illusion, they stopped listening when the word socialism was discussed. They're done because they're blinded by the propaganda. And this is what Casey Wright said, and this is where that point came from my mind. He says, and this he's responding to Cat Turner and the rest of them calling this out as socialism. He says, does he realize that only approximately 28% of the Venezuelan economy is ran by the government? You can look this up. And 72% is private sector. And this is the point, that in that 28, it's specifically, it's the natural resources. The rest of it is private sector for the most part. Then he says the U.S. government, by the way, is 85% private sector and 15% government. So the 13% difference makes Venezuela communist or whatever? Venezuela has the same rough percentage as Germany. But weird how we don't talk about that. It's just subjective and manipulated. There's issues with all these places, but to pretend that it's only because of this one thing that you're supposed to hate because they taught you to, you're being played. Here's End Wokeness making that point for me, saying exit polls from the Wall Street Journal. You know, that conservative platform, right? Opposition leader, 65%. Socialist dictator, Maduro, 31%. Whatever we're supposed to believe from these polls. No leader or media organization should legitimize this fake election. Think about these people. Why does End Wokeness think they have any insight on what's going on? Because Elon said. Because the current drive from this side of our paradigm is all about what that's supposed to be. Fake, Maduro bad, communism, socialism bad. Well, guess what? John Jackman makes this point perfectly well. He says, I'm anti-woke. Oh, and here's some BS poll from the Wall Street Journal. I believe uncritically. Think of how stupid that is. These are the same people that in COVID-19 conversation would go, oh, you're going to give me a Wall Street Journal article? You're ridiculous. They're so blinded by... Oh, but now because the Wall Street Journal, the corporate media suddenly says what you agree with, well, here you go. See, it's fake. Can't we tell based on those numbers they gave us? Why can't we see that? Unreal. And I think, hold on, I want to see what I saw of what Propaganda and Co. had put a comment down there. Oh yeah, it says, why should we expect the Wall Street Journal exit poll to be an accurate or truthful indicator of the election results? They said Maduro won. It's their opinion. I agree. He says, get over it and stop trying to interfere in other nations' affairs. But isn't that a little bit ridiculous to suddenly take the word of the very thing that you would shout down if it was about another topic you disagreed with? Oh, that's a Democrat paper. No, whatever. It's the same stuff. And that's what I said about the same post. I said, here's End Wokeness calling the election Maduro just won fake. As we discussed last night, and we did, we called this before it even ended. Despite the obvious popular support, which is evident, I said, should their guy have won, and this is completely my opinion, I have no doubt the same lack of evidence would have demonstrated the opposite, meaning that they would have read it however they wanted to, right? So should the other person have won, are you going to pretend they wouldn't have gone, oh, the Wall Street Journal, they're a Democrat shill, they're lying for their side, right? You know that's exactly what would happen. That's my opinion, but I think that's very obvious. Elon Musk tags this same tweet and says, what a travesty. Right. He's just drooling over that lithium, I think. Solomon Ahmed says, Edison Research, Wall Street Journal are Zionists. They wanted to overthrow Maduro. They had independent journalists from the West observe the elections. You're lying is the point, and it's all about progressing the agenda. I'm hoping people with this or any number of other platforms are able to see how obviously this is the same thing we've dealt with over and over and over and over. Multiple times they've tried. Bolton has been drooling about this forever. Venezuela, Nicaragua, Ecuador, Iran. These guys dreams about this stuff, and he's been pushing it through Trump. This is what your government has been trying to do, despite whatever Democrat, Republican, D or R game they're playing. They've done the same things. It's just sad that we can't get past this. And I actually think that a lot of people are beginning to, but every time something like this happens, it just wraps people right back into it. Now let's get into, let me close some of these, the conversation of what happened in Israel. And this is a rough conversation because it's a really disgusting story. But it's important to understand that this happened. See if I can just get it to the ones that are left. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So PVT breaks this down, and this is reported by Ynet News. Here's the article itself. It's Israeli media. This is a widely reported story. It's breaking out all over the place. Probably, and by the way, let me know in the chat if something new has happened on this. Here's the actual article: sexual abuse. They say of terrorists, right? But all we're talking about is people that were detained without charge. That's easily proven. So they write, 10 Israeli soldiers have been detained for gang raping a Palestinian, well, it's multiple Palestinian prisoners, apparently a man and a female or more, from the said Tiamin torture camp. This is the same torture camp in which, now you could argue that's just as, like as Israel saying rape dungeons and so on. I would agree calling it a torture camp, but the point is that we've already proven that they are torturing people. So technically it's accurate, but still I argue it's better just to call it a detention camp or whatever that they torture in, right? But it says, this is the site, the same torture camp in which Palestinians were raped to death, by the way, covered by the United Nations, covered by human rights groups, with electric rods. Zionist politicians are rushing to protect the soldiers and fighting the decision to detain them. And just in case, we'll get to this in a second, but remember, they publicly admitted this. People like the religious Zionism party elements of this, or the Jewish Power Party elements of this, the Netanyahu coalition have publicly said this is okay and that they can do what they want. I'll show you the actual discussion that's happening again today, where they're literally debating about whether it's okay to rape these people. This is crazy that this is not, what this has to show you is that the people like the Matt Millers, Blinkens, Bidens, Trumps, RFKs of the world don't care about that. They know this is what they're dealing with because it's everywhere. They have to deny it all the time. They know, they see this stuff. And they're not just denying murdering people in Gaza. This is what the Zionist people, entities have done to this country. These people are justifying fighting for rape. Guys, this is not some hyperbolic story. This is crazy. Now, this is the new case from Net News. Here's the New York Times reporting discussing and this is the point. This is discussing where they were using hot iron rods to rape people, some of them to death. This is the New York Times. We've already covered this. Now here is Muhammad Shihada. Israeli soldiers have severely gang raped a Gazan detainee at this camp. The case was so extreme, the victim had to be hospitalized and the IDF had to detain 10 of the reservists. Now, they're official capacity at this point, so they're part of the military operation. Israeli ministers are now calling the rapists holy, calling them heroes, demanding their release. Guys, this is not made up. This is in Israeli media. Now, I'm going to show you the images of people like Smotrich trying to force the door open, trying to get these people released, calling them heroes. And they are publicly acknowledged to have gang raped these people who are under custody. Israel's Knesset is currently on a summer break, but it's currently holding an emergency discussion. This is happening now to defend the rapist IDF soldiers who were detained for gang raping a Gazan detainee so severely that they were hospitalized. That's what they're saying right here. And this is the Yemen field, I guess is what this is called, or field office or field location. Yemen field raid, Yemeni field raid. He says Israel's finance minister is calling the rapist soldiers heroic warriors, demanding their immediate release. This is him talking right there. The security minister, many ministers and a member of Knesset are defending them too. He says IDF soldiers deserve respect. IDF soldiers will not arrest the last of the criminals. I'm calling the Fastriat, take your hands off our heroic warriors. He's talking about the people that were arrested for raping these people, that they were hospitalized because of it. And this says, under the reader's note, the same soldiers are suspected of sexually abusing the terrorist, a detained person without charge, who arrived at the hospital with bruises on his anus. As I understand it, it's also a woman, by the way. But this is what we're talking about, to the point to where they have to fact check this guy. He's openly calling them heroes. He goes on to say, Israeli journalists and public figures are also rushing and scrambling to defend the IDF gang rapists who severely assaulted the Gazan civilians. There are wide calls for pro-rapist protests in Israel now. It's all over the place, guys. They're calling to protest for these people, defending them. Sort of like the one that burned the child. What was it? The child, Ali, And they were dancing and praising and burning effigies of a child, saying Ollie is burning alive or on the barbecue, right? These are the people we're talking about. And they were proudly defended. The Gazan gang rape victim was hospitalized with a serious wound on his rectum. Israeli media is calling him a Nakba terrorist to cover it up. Like, what they're trying to do is water down the term Nakba. Like, they're just act like Nakba terrorist. So a catastrophe terrorist, they know what it means. They know it represents the first catastrophe where they ethnically cleansed and genocided all these people. That's why they're just trying to use it another way. But every single detainee at this area is a civilian, and they've never been charged with a crime or put on trial. Not a single one. Combatants are detained elsewhere. Israeli, and that's the point. That's why people have highlighted this. Even the New York Times. This location is, this is like the Guantanamo Bay scenario. Israelis are rushing to the site for a mass protest. We'll show you some videos. They're not there to demand the release of the unjustly kidnapped and systematically tortured gang raped Gazan civilians. These protesters are there to show solidarity, full support for the IDF gang rapists. Here's Owen Jones, highlighting what Prem Thacker from The Intercept says, or I guess now ZTO News, thought it was The Intercept. He says, as the Israeli parliament debates whether it's okay to rape prisoners, I will show you that next, guys. It's not a joke. A mob, including lawmakers, multiple, attacks the base in a protest to release the 9 soldiers or more suspected of sexually assaulting the prisoner. They literally push their way in. I'll show you the examples of the politicians doing that. Owen Jones says there have been multiple allegations of rape and sexual abuse of Palestinian women and men by Israeli soldiers for months. Guys, for decades. I've done entire segments on this going back decades, showing you the evidence of their own media highlighting what they've been doing to both Israelis and Palestinians. The Western media have overwhelmingly ignored those allegations, while completely highlighting and repeating the ones that have been proven to be false. Now, Israelis are literally rioting in support of sexual assaulting Palestinians. That speaks for itself. Jeffrey Lafredo, showing the same videos. This person says, the protesters broke through the gate at the Seed Yemen, it's kind of a common, Seed Temenian, Yemeni gate, whatever it's called. And now they are demonstrating at the base of the calling for the death to the terrorists. They're calling for the death of the people that were raped. That's how that usually goes, right? So think about this. Of all the Israeli push about how you're denying rape, here are people that are not only denying that this is a problem, but now asking for the people that were raped to be killed. Wonder why that's not being talked about. Me too, unless you're a Palestinian, right? How's that work? Oh, wait, this is forgot what he said. Hold on. Jeffrey Lafredo says, for months, Palestinian men have been kidnapped from Gaza and brought to, this is what I was trying to say before, Timian prison, where dozens of reports of torture and rape have been reported. All across the board, from human rights groups, from the UN, from even New York Times have shared it. Palestinians have reported that they have had burning hot metal rods forced up their anus. Minister of National Security Ben Gvir responded to these allegations, and this is the reality, guys, by admitting that they were true and that the guards, quote, rule the prison without question and do whatever they please, and proposed a solution to military prisons that were overcrowded with Palestinian prisoners, killing the prisoners. We covered this. The corporate media didn't care. All the ones supporting Israel ignored it. Right on the surface. He says now because some prison guards are being investigated for systematic rape of Palestinian detainees, Israeli civilians are driving hours into the desert and storming the prison in solidarity with the rapists. These are average Israelis in some cases. Here is Mariav from 972 magazine. And here's a video, actually. Check this out. This is a Israeli member of Knesset forcing his way in. So the ones in green are, I believe, the prison guards, or at least the authority kind of controlling this area. And the point is that they're the ones holding back the mob until they get through, which happened. And the point is they're trying to get through because they're trying to get through, in some cases, screaming to kill the people that they have detained. So all this claim of the only democracy and all these arguments that it's like the West, like this is, think about this happening in the United States of Lindsey Graham trying to force his way into a prison and calling for the murder of a person that was arrested without charge. That's what's happening here. Here's what he does. See, and he started this. So, I mean, it's already going, but the point is now they started getting very aggressive and pushing at the fence. And she says, is there a word for coup, but by a sitting member of the Knesset? Here is a member of Knesset breaking into a military base to protest the military prosecutor arresting soldiers accused of torturing and raping Palestinian detainees. Here is the actual discussion going on today. An Israeli member of Knesset from Likud, Netanyahu's party, stated that it is legitimate to rape Palestinian detainees in Israeli prisons. This is not a joke. These are not fringe politicians, guys. These are the ones from the ruling party whose leader was given a hero's welcome at the United States Congress a few days ago. This is disgusting. Here's just they caption it right here. And you'll see them. Right there. To insert a stick in a person's rectum, is that legitimate? Shut up. It says, yes. If he is a Nakba, everything is legitimate to do. Guys, that's a legitimate argument from a leading member of the Israeli government saying, yeah, we can do whatever we want because they're not charged with a crime. And even then, we're supposed to pretend that this is democracy, and they're saying, yeah, as long as we claim they're a terrorist, you could do whatever you want to them. Rape, torture, yeah. They're like, yep, exactly. Shut up, yes. My God. And that's what it says right there. So here's what you see after that. This is what happened. Now they're inside, and they're trying to hold off this mob. See, these are prisoners in there. Look at them trying to break this open. It looks like some in the green. So my point is, this is what we're talking. This is the divide where you've got people in authority, random people. Like it's completely scattered. Some of which don't care. Some of which are, and they're literally, think about being those people in those jails, arrested for being Palestinian. And these people are calling, and some of them have been raped. And now they're coming in there. Do they want to murder you? Sure sounds like a democracy to me, right? I mean, it does, actually. Mob rule. Exactly right. Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. That's the wrong video. But either way, my point is these people are trying to force their way into this conversation. Right. So hold on. So let me show you that one next, since I brought that up already. Was it this one? Hold on. Oh, damn it. Okay. Well, I'm almost certain that I had the video. Maybe I just remember I saw that wrong. In any case, the point was I thought that was so this clear for what's going on is that the ultimate point is they're trying to force their way in. Many of them got through the fence. They're basically trying to get these people killed. That's I was under the impression that was that video, but I guess I'm wrong. So this is still the same point though. These are people inside forcing back and forth against the people in the green who are trying to hold them off essentially. I mean, just think how terrifying this must be even for them. There's no accountability here. Where are the police or most of them are on their side. Like this is what happens when you allow the kind of people like we're talking about, the Zionist extremists, to be in charge. Guess what? Guess what's leading your country right now? A Christian Zionist. Here it says, we already showed you that. This is the part to me that I just can't get past. You realize that they know we can see this, right? That they know that the world can see this. And they're openly shouting out that yes, we can rape them. That's legitimate. It just blows me away. And then you've got people like Matt Miller and Kirby and Biden and Trump and RFK openly defending this entity. Again, as I'll say every time, no matter it's not all Israelis, not all Jews, but definitely a majority of the Zionist-influenced population. And that goes well beyond just this one country. Here, same point. She says years of incitement. This is Muriel from 972. Years of incitement, dehumanization, impunity, and total disdain for the rule of law have led us to this point. She's an Israeli. She's openly, and this is the point, is this is breaking down in front of us. And what do you get from your government? More blind support than even their population. That has to show you something. Whether that is control, influence, bribery, sexual blackmail, I don't know. But that doesn't make sense. And look at them just trying to hold these people off. Here is Haaretz. U.S. pushing to deter Israel from striking Beirut. Oh, that's the wrong one. Oh, man, hold on. I knew I hit that. Earlier when I was getting ready, I think I hit something, but I can't go back. Well, we'll just skip it. It was most likely like one of the, we'll show you some of these Haaretz articles that just sort of, my point in showing you any of these right now is that the Haaretz articles are just, it's if we were to say this in this conversation in the United States, you get most of the right at this point, calling you a Hamas supporting terrorist or whatever, and you'll find far more specific and stated things in Israeli media saying, like we're going to show you later, Netanyahu is sabotaging the ceasefire talks. And yet we say it here and they're like, you're a conspiracy theorist. It just, how is this actually happening? God, I wish I remember what that was now. This obviously was the article we had from before about Beirut. Oh, well. So continuing this conversation, here's Quds News. Far-right Israeli minister, and this is Smotrich, leads Israeli settlers in storming this area. Leads them, by the way, in support of rapists and demanding the execution of Palestinians. Along with the Knesset members, he called for protests during which they stormed the military base following the arrest of multiple jailers for torturing and sexually assaulting Palestinians. Now, just to realize, guys, that's ongoing as the Knesset debates about how they can rape people to their heart's desire. Quds News Network is just simply showing you that what's always going on. So all these people that are in those prisons are people like this: doctors, nurses, teachers, painters, Palestinians. Being arrested, being blindfolded, being stripped, being tortured, in many cases right here, sometimes being killed, being taken away, and then almost all of them later being released, which I don't even understand that. But they're still holding 10,000 plus people in their prisons. I mean, I've been talking about this from the very beginning. Admitted to is about 3,700 something that are admittedly without charge. It's way more than that. These are prisoners. They're tortured. These are hostages. They're not charged. They're being held indefinitely. And you can look at these people, guys. I mean, this is what they're doing. These are the people getting raped in prison. She said, the Post says, a Washington Post investigation has concluded. So corporate media. Not that that means it's true, but it shows you things are shifting. Palestinians are subject to deadly abuses in these prisons. A Palestinian prisoner died from a spleen rupture and rib fractures after being beaten by the guards. Palestinian prisoners have died due to negligence. Now we know they've died due to rape, torture, and everything else under the sun. That goes to the one we've talked about before of the hot rod and others that one of them died from this. That's where that actually came out. Now here's the article so you can read it for yourself. Palestinians recount deadly abuses in these prisons. It is Guantanamo. That's what he says. Here is another example. And Adam makes an excellent point here, guys. No matter what you think is happening, whether you even think these are terrorists, they're not. Many of them are wearing scrubs, by the way. The point is, never in history have the good guys taken pictures like this. Now, I technically disagree with that. They wouldn't be good guys at the point, but in the framing, you can find examples of, let's say, American soldiers taking stuff like this during Iraq and so on, and they're framed as the good guys. But the ultimate point is the same. People that are doing this, no matter what side they're on, are not the good guys. That's crazy to me. And it's a great point because this is showing you that they're taking pleasure from doing this to people, posting on TikTok with smiley faces and laughing about it. And he says, and then they insult our intelligence, calling the most moral army in the world. Mordecai here says, and this is Mossad commentary posting this. This is from July 25th, guys. He says, good morning from beautiful Gaza. And they played this video. Just making them all chant something, all blindfolded and terrified, standing out in the freezing cold. Guys, that's what they're doing. They're having fun with torturing these people. And what he says is, what you are showing, it's proof that you are Nazi Zionist. Keep showing these videos for a good history record. He's I believe he's an Israeli Jew in Israel. And I think that's just, him broken English kind of translation, but he's calling him out. Zachary Foster. Now this one really upsets me, only because it's the same kind of conversation as what they would do, highlighting the women that are in Gaza, right? It's a terrifying story. Whether or not they're actually IDF members and POWs, which most of them were, it's still, if you could just be objective and stand back and go, yeah, it's probably terrifying. And even though they probably killed children and laughed and danced about it before that happened, the point is that they're women and they're in an area full of military men. And that's, no matter what war setting, that's terrifying. And so that's why they constantly push out the idea of the women and the children, because they want you to act like they feel that way. So here's an example, and we already pointed this one out. This is a woman who's been has been held indefinitely. No charge. Her name is Lion Nasir. As Zachary Foster, who is a PhD in Palestinian history from Princeton, says Israeli occupation soldiers kidnapped her on April 2024. She has not been charged with a crime. This is just one spotlight of thousands of people. Her imprisonment can be renewed indefinitely, and it just was for four more months. What do you think they're doing? Are they investigating her? No, this is torture. She is one of more than 3,400 that they've admitted to publicly, Palestinian hostages currently being held in Israeli prisons without charge, where she will likely be subject to beatings, torture, solitary confinement, sexual abuse, or death. So think about this. 4 months now, 4 more months. If they're raping men, what do you think they're doing to her? Now, I'm not assuming. I'm not playing the Matt Miller game here. I don't know what's happening. All I'm saying is that what's the likelihood of what she must be dealing with if they're doing this to everybody we can see? They're coming out of there with limbs missing, all emaciated, and now we have evidence of rape going on, which we already knew. What do you think they're doing to this woman? Breaking her, laughing about it. That's what we see everywhere. It's not my opinion. I don't know if that's happened to her, but what they're doing, they're posting it everywhere. She used to work at the Women's Rights Institution, of course, in Ramallah, before being kidnapped by Israel's apartheid soldiers. But because she's a Palestinian hostage, rather than an Israeli hostage, mainstream media will not cover her story. Typical. Now, PVT also highlights the American settler hostage, Liat Atzili, who spoke to Haaretz. Had a different story. And you already know this story. She tells Haaretz that Hamas treated her humanely and took care of her. These are just a few of her statements in this interview, which you can read for yourself. It's right here in Hebrew, so most Americans won't know it exists. As it says, talked to her kidnappers in Gaza for weeks about religion, politics, about the Holocaust, about life. Right, let's pretend like she'd be talking to the Jew haters about the Holocaust, right? Because it's not what they are. They are against Zionists. Now, again, you're always going to find some overlap, but the point is, everything they're telling you about this is a lie. Here's what she said in the interview. Hamas was not scary and repeatedly told her that they would keep her safe. Hamas went and got her pizza. Hamas kept physical boundaries with her and she did not fear any sexual violence when asked about sexual assault. Hamas fighters would talk about history, travel, pets, and cooking with her. They also let her watch TV. The house she was kept in was completely open and she walked around freely. You know, the houses that they bomb without consideration for who might be in those houses, which is why they've killed almost all of these people, I argue. Hamas fighters gave her a human attitude treatment. This is her statements, guys. These are her statements. That's not to say that there's not others raping or torturing. But what I can tell you, as an objective researcher, that there's no evidence of that. And every single one that has come out has told you a story that challenges what they tell you is happening. Then they try to make an outrage point about how, look at this, they made her wear this shirt. They made her hold this. Oh my God, they made her clean. Yeah, and that's quite a deviation from they raped and tortured her, isn't it? But that's desperation for you. But just keeping this in mind, talking about what they're doing to these people, and then asking or then hearing what's happening in reverse. I don't know how this is not the most obvious thing in the world. Here, Tiberius is kind of just breaking down the week for you. Here's the week. Monday, dozens murdered by Israel, bodies left in the street. Netanyahu meets with the U.S. Secretary of State, given red carpet treatment. Tuesday, children burnt alive by Israel. Oh, these are all real, by the way. Charcoal bodies all over the internet. Netanyahu gives a speech in Congress with private invitees, 58 rounds of applause. Wednesday, refugee camp bombed by Israel, many dead. Netanyahu meets first U.S. presidential candidate for private dinner. Trump. Thursday, entire families murdered by Israel, children dying live on stream. Netanyahu meets second U.S. presidential candidate for private dinner. Oh, I forget which one. That might have been one of those was Trump. Friday, dozens of refugees murdered by Israel in front of the world. UN rapporteur likens Netanyahu to Hitler. Saturday, school bomb by Israel, dozens killed. Figureheads come out to condemn rapporteur for daring to criticize Netanyahu. Sunday, children beheaded by Israel, and there was a legitimate case where that was on what very easily shown. Literal decapitation. I just didn't talk about it. Children beheaded by Israel, tiny, limbless bodies on everyone's feeds. Israeli figureheads angry that they haven't been given more arms to murder people faster. The week repeats and repeats and repeats. The massacres change. The bodies are different. The names and lives destroyed are all brand new, but the death, the destruction, the pain, the hypocrisy, and the lies and depravity at its root, that never, ever, ever changes. And the we who cares bear witness, and those who dare resist. We are surrounded by complicity, by ignorant clowns whose careless pursuit of the immaterial drowns and screams of children burning alive. Oh, there is no escaping it. We are in the darkest bowels of hell. Now, clearly, he seems a little bit black-pilled, doesn't he? Because it's hard not to watch what's going on and not lose faith in everything. But I caution against it because I know there's good out there. And I know that I think most people are doing, or I think that's my point is always about why they try to pretend they're doing good things. It's just time for us to recognize that the left-right paradigm, and I argue a diminishing minority, are desperate to keep you trapped in a cycle because they benefit from it. All we need to do is stand back and recognize that we all feel the same way Tiberius does, and that we can change it because we have the power to do so if we actually see beyond the two-party illusion. Let's not forget, though, here's what a TV anchor said a while ago. This was, I think, she reposted on the 25th of July, but it was a while ago. He spoke to live TV and said, "We Israelis are coming. We're going," she paraphrased a little bit. I'll just read it to you. I says, "I assure you that it will come, their attack. In case you are confused, I assure you that it will come." And it says, "And the numbers you did not imagine, that is possible. It is possible to get them. And we are ready to enter international unity. We are prepared to fight with the United States." That's what it says. And the entire world. So just make sure you hear that mentality. These are Israeli leading media personalities who are saying, we don't care. We'll attack you. We'll go after you. We'll come after the United States. Yeah, that's the point, because that's who we're dealing with. And your politicians who are co-opted by this entity just don't tell you that because they're co-opted by this entity. Censored Man points out an important overlap with Saddam Hussein and Erdogan. He says, this is the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs. Here, and this is the tweet down here, you've seen cats before, he threatens Erdogan from Turkey, who's been outspoken about Israel, with suffering the same fate as Saddam Hussein for threatening Israel. Oh, look at that. This is a great tweet, by the way. He says, for those who don't know, during the Gulf War, Saddam actually launched 39 ballistic missiles at Israel, which hit Tel Aviv. Israel saw him as a persistent threat to their national security. Israel lobbied the U.S. government for a number of years to push for a war with Iraq, with Netanyahu addressing Congress and urging them to take action. So again, how many times have we talked about this? Just like Osama bin Laden and the rest, they were the ally until they weren't anymore. Here's the central factor for why. So this guy thought he had it all tied up. The United States government giving him chemical weapons to use against Kuwait. Like they were working with him, right? But then he does does the wrong thing, bombs Israel. And now the United States sells him out. He becomes the biggest boogeyman of the world. And Israel pushes them to take him out, and suddenly they do it. And what did that do? Did that benefit this country? Did it benefit the Middle East? No, it benefited Israel at the expense of everybody else. It says, for those who don't know, he shot those missiles at Tel Aviv. Israel saw him as a threat. Israel lobbied the U.S. government for a number of years to push them to war with Iraq, with Netanyahu addressing Congress and urging them to take action. What did we just see? Look at that. What was he just doing? Urging for war. Same old thing, round and round we go. Americans were told at the time the Iraq war was, of course, due to Iraq's involvement in 9/11 and possessing WMDs, both of which were lies. Both were lies. And they knew at the time they were lies. We can prove that. Here, he says, Israel's foreign minister clearly acknowledges that the Iraq war was due to Saddam's government posing a threat to Israel. They're brazen about this. They love to suggest or point out that they can manipulate the United States. It says Erdogan follows in the footsteps of Saddam Hussein and threatens to attack Israel. Just let him remember what happened there and how it ended. It says this is also a non-NATO country threatening a NATO country. Shouldn't that matter to the NATO alliance? I guess things aren't as they appear. Not one Israeli soldier took part in the Iraq war. Not one. Approximately 5,000 U.S. troops died in the Iraq war. Over 300 troops from the UK and other coalition countries also died. Approximately 1 million Iraqi civilians died, famously 500,000 children that Albright said was worth it. Over 200,000 Iraqis fled the country as refugees, and here's the important part overlapping with Venezuela. Now, think about all the other wars in the Middle East since 1948, and think about all those all those wars were really for. What do you think happened with those refugees? They were used just like we're talking about in every other dynamic. Weaponized migration, and Israel playing a central role. He says, you've been lied to for far too long. Israel is no ally of the West. Israel is no enemy of the West. Israel is the enemy of the West. You can decide for yourself, but I think it's important to recognize they're literally threatening a NATO ally because he says the wrong thing about Israel and says, we're going to take you the way of Saddam Hussein, which was a U.S. ally until he wasn't because of Israel. Now, Alan Mizrahi makes a point about Netanyahu's visit that I think is important. You can disagree if you want. I think it's his opinion, but I think it's interesting to consider. He says Netanyahu's visit began with an assassination attempt on Trump, continued with Biden stepping down, culminated in the United States Congress swearing allegiance to him, 58 standing ovations, breaking records, and ended with an unprecedented purported Hezbollah attack on Drew's children and the U.S. greenlighting a war against Lebanon. Except we know that was a failed Iron Dome rocket or intentional, and it killed those children they used to blame on Hezbollah. All of this, he's talking about the idea this all happened while Netanyahu is perusing the country. He says, life is pure magic, I tell you. The point is that he's suggesting clearly that this is being done. It's a fair point. Weird how he comes drifting through the country and all these things, all the stops are pulled. Don't forget, as he points out, as Khaleesi showed us, they applauded like paid seals. And that goes on 56 times or 58. No, they didn't even count all of them. I think it's like 56, actually. The point is that this was a record-breaking standing applause for a guy that is more obviously committing genocide than I think anything we've ever seen. And so it's I don't know what's more alarming, that they either don't know that or are unable to see it, or that they know and don't care. I don't know what's more alarming. And here is what Adam points out. Congress gave 58 standing ovations for mass murder, much of which was happening while he was there. Kenneth Roth points out, while they're cheering him on, former Israeli military chiefs of staff and Mossad directors, people who can't be dismissed as anti-Semites, tell Congress that Netanyahu, quote, poses an existential threat to the state of Israel. Why? Because he's now fighting the war in Gaza for himself, not for Israel. And yet they still stand up and cheer him. They still push all the narratives because this has nothing to do with anything other than the interest of the Zionist, well, Zionist organization, Israel itself, and whoever they're manipulating. It's not about you as Americans, even as Israelis or Jews at large. These are people standing up in support of these things and saying Netanyahu and what they're doing in Gaza is not for anything but themselves. And still they don't care. Francesca Albanese, this is the video I've already played for you. We'll see where we're at right now. And this is the quoted from this video. No toddler gets shot twice in the head by mistake. This is Dr. Mark Perlmutter. And we played you many of them, and I've played this more than once, but this is a very impactful video showing you what they're really doing.
When were you in Gaza?
End of April for the first couple weeks. And then there's sniper bullets. I have children that were shot twice.
Wait, you're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers?
Definitively. I have 2 children that I have photographs of that were shot so perfectly in the chest I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately, and directly on the side of the head in the same child. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper. And they're dead center shots.
In fact, more than 20 doctors recently in Gaza also told Sunday Morning about gunshot wounds to children. One American doctor told us he even reviewed CT scans to confirm what he saw because he, quote, didn't believe that this many children could be admitted to a single hospital with gunshot wounds to the head. Some shootings have been captured on video.
So, of all the disaster zones you've seen, how does Gaza compare?
All of the disasters I've seen combined, 40 mission trips, 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all of that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage that I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza.
And when you say civilians, is it mostly children?
Almost exclusively children. I've never seen that before. Never seen that. I've seen more incinerated children than I've ever seen in my entire life combined. I've seen more shredded children in just the first week.
Shredded?
Shredded.
What do you mean?
Missing body parts, being crushed by buildings, the greatest majority, or bomb explosions, the next greatest majority. We've taken shrapnel as big as my thumb out of 8-year-olds.
The UN reports that to date, more than 80% of Gaza's population has been displaced and the majority of its buildings destroyed. A reality which has taken its own toll on the well-being of children.
What about the emotional wounds?
How can you measure that? I can't measure my own. How do you be an orphan and watching your family, melted in front of you and shredded in front of you? How do you fix that? Ever fix that?
In fact, so many Palestinian children have had family members killed that doctors created a shorthand term, WCNSF, wounded child, no surviving family.
I just don't know how you can watch that. As a Jewish doctor, by the way, like that should matter. It's just another human being pointing out what he's seeing firsthand. How in the world you can take that and, what the reality is that people that have chosen their side just act like he's lying. He works for Hamas or whatever, despite all the evidence. It's a really, really disgusting time. And that's nobody's fault other than the Israeli government and all those supporting it. Where were we? It's hard to hear. Hold on. How did I just lose my place? Oh, that's right. I forgot because we played it from right there. Okay. So here's the IDF pointing out on the 27th. Due to significant terrorist activity and rocket fire towards the state of Israel from the southern area of Khan Yunis, the area that they told everyone to go to because it was safe because they supposedly had it controlled. But now, weirdly, there's rockets flying. But not that we can see, though. Not that anyone has video of. Just statements, which I've said for many, many years is easy to do. They've done this before. I've proven this, where they just write about there's a missile rocket hit a field. And then they just use that narrative. And by the way, the Israeli media has broken this down many, many times. That's not to say that there's not rockets fired sometimes. But they have open. This is like we just showed you where they're saying Netanyahu is fighting this for himself. I mean, that's in fact what we're seeing in Israeli media. Wherever that one was, I'll get to it. Simply saying that and I just read you from one of their statements, this one here, saying that he's doing this for himself, not for Israel. So my point is that they'll tell you he'll actively engage with war against Gaza and helpless people to benefit himself politically. They've done it many times. So as we're hearing them just go, rockets flew from an area they were supposed to be protecting, which is their obligation as the occupier. It's just the point is they don't even have to prove any of this stuff. And then what do? Well, they bomb the location, which is what they've been doing. So the story is, well, we had to, and now the remaining area has become dangerous. So that means they're that inept, let it happen, or they're lying. Accordingly, at this time, the area will be adjusted. So all they're doing is changing the areas. And remember, they don't care about these. They bomb the areas they're in, where they're going, where they are. It's constant. And it's been proven by almost every corporate platform, and every independent platform, and every United Nations platform, and every human rights group. They just don't care. And so my point is, as they say, we'll move them for safety, they've been bombing this area for months now. But we're supposed to pretend like now they're going to move them because now it's become dangerous? My God. All they're doing is moving them into smaller and smaller areas, scattering them around, watching them flee like terrified animals, like a pinball in a pinball machine. They're just jamming them around, laughing about it the whole way. They are posting this stuff on their own social media, making fun of them. And here is the result. A Palestinian girl removed from under the rubble, crushed by an entire building. This is every day. That's what you're seeing, guys. Is that Hamas? Is there a tunnel? It doesn't even matter. They're indiscriminately bombing, like the UN just said, like the ICC said, like the ICJ said, like every other thing we have said, like the Human Rights Group, the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, Oxfam, UNICEF, every single group in the world other than these governments are telling you that they are murdering people for fun. But let's keep debating. Here is what the 7th public display of Israel flagrantly using human shields. Just got caught, posted by themselves, I believe, tied to the front of their car. Remember, they had to make up an excuse for why they got caught doing that last time, and here they are doing it again. Clearly, they care about being held accountable, right? Here's my discussion about human shields, if you want to watch it, the open secret. They called the neighbor procedure. They still do it. They publicly know that. Syrian girl points out how the IDF tied a Palestinian dead body to the back of their car and then drove around, because why not? Clearly, that's what democracies do, right? Is that about some kind of Hamas tunnel concept, or, they pretending they're making sure they're not mined as they then drive down the street laughing about it and posting videos? Damn it. Well, here's what their own media wants to tell you if you actually want to pay attention to them. In Gaza, Israel lost what remained of its humanity. That is Haaretz, one of the leading Israeli newspapers, telling you Israel has lost what remained of its humanity. Right, but let's pretend like it's only us anti-Semites over here, right? It's crazy. They'll call anybody an anti-Semite that simply points out the truth. Assault Rod discusses how Niall Stanage asks Kirby, about whether he's a war criminal. Right? Isn't that what the ICC said? Do you believe that? And watch the way he responds. That they just don't care.
Thanks, John. Just to take the long view of this, very early in President Biden's presidency, February the 4th, 2021, he spoke at the State Department about his priorities in foreign policy. And he said that one of those priorities was reclaiming our credibility and moral authority. The Prime Minister of Israel is, in the judgment of the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, a war criminal. Isn't posting an alleged war criminal in the Oval Office undermining of credibility and moral authority?
No, yeah. We don't consider him a war criminal.
But the international...
Right, so that's it. That's it. No, because we disagree. Oh, okay, hashtag international law, hashtag rules-based international order, right? We just disagree. Well, that's fine. Then disagree. But you can't then pretend that you're involved in some kind of international order that you pretend like we're all agree. That's not how that works. You can argue that we shouldn't be a part of that. There's a fair argument to be made. But what they're doing is pretending, and this is more either Trump or Biden, by the way, that they're not necessarily the rules-based international order, but the idea, the games that are played with international law, where they act like they're bound, whether they're acting within it. And then any moment they disagree, they just go, no, we think otherwise. Well, these things are ultimately not, if we're talking about the ICC, the ICJ, all the international groups, and what we're discussing is provable evidence of war crimes, which I don't need to sell you guys on. It's the most, it's mind-blowing to me that people like this think this won't follow them for the rest of their life. That Kirby and Miller and the rest of them won't be haunted by committing genocide complicity for the rest of their life. They will. I don't know how they think they're getting away. Maybe they're threatened and threatened and blackmailed as well. I don't know. My point is to stand there and act so smugly like you just disagree. Well, the whole point is you're supposed to say that international law is what you're bound by, and that the difference is we listen to the law. Isn't that what Miller said? Except here's the law telling you he's a criminal, and you go, nope, we disagree. I mean, that's like next time I run a red light, can I just go, nope, I disagree, officer. That's not what I think happened. Is that how that works? Maybe you're right, too. My point is that that's not how this is supposed to work. These people are criminals. They just have enough power to get away with it.
Criminal Court does.
We don't.
But the International Criminal Court does.
We don't agree. And as we've said before, we don't find the ICC's finding to be relevant or appropriate in this case.
Oh, and by the way, make sure you take note of the Israel hostage tag he's wearing on his neck right there. Why does that make sense? One of these tags they made up that are all propaganda based. Most of these are detainees because they're all IDF members, the ones we're talking about anyway. There are some examples of civilians, and a lot of these were killed by the IDF. And here he is wearing one of these tags while he's shouting down the obvious reality. I wonder if that's connected. What do you think?
We don't find him to be a war criminal. He's an ally and a partner and a friend.
Well, the chief prosecutor says that Israel does have legitimate war aims, of course, but the way Israel chose to achieve these in Gaza, namely intentionally causing death, starvation, great suffering, and serious injury to body or health of the civilian population, are criminal.
Is that a question?
Because if think about that response. Just blithely disregard that question. Like, yeah, who cares, right? We already answered. We don't agree. You don't agree that they're starving, murdering, raping, torturing. Yeah, we disagree, right? Let's just disagree. That's not how that works, stupid. It's obvious that we all see through this. Like, it's amazing that this is the stance they're taking. I just am seriously blown away by that.
Of the civilian population are criminal.
Is that a question? Because if it is, I've already answered it. We don't consider him a war criminal.
That's it. End of story. Move on. Next question. I mean, that's crazy. Here, even the UK is beginning to pull back. And here's Arsen Atrocities, the fake human rights lawyer, saying, now confirmed, UK drops appeal over baseless and unconscionable ICC warrants against Israeli leaders. Meaning they won't push back on it anymore. They're not appealing it anymore. Why? Because it's what's going on. You're committing genocide. And says this is not only a cowardly betrayal of an ally, but also betrayal of UK's commitment to the rule of law. Yeah, the rule of law is to disregard law for your allies' interests, right? Maybe to them. The UK will not oppose the ICC to arrest warrant for Israel. And that's the UK, for crying out loud. And the US is locked in. The government, anyway. On a different note, here is an example of the kind of impunity afforded to Israelis, even in this country. And we've talked about that with Saudi Arabia, too. It's not unique to just Israel. Saudi Arabia gets away with rape and murder, too. And I've did multiple focuses on this, where they will get in car accidents or rape women and then just be allowed to fly back to Saudi Arabia. Nothing ever happens. I forget what, I'll have to bring it up again. I think it was in Oregon. There was a local police group that did an entire breakdown. Hundreds of these people where they tried to charge them and they just get allowed to fly away. The government allows that. How in the world is that in the interest of Americans? Same point here. Judge agrees to drop charges of an Israeli diplomat's teen son who ran over a Florida cop. You probably heard of the story. He's 19 years old. Abraham Gill was arrested in January in Florida, Sunny Isles Beach, after he intentionally ran his motorcycle over a police officer, leaving him with an incapacitating leg injury, according to authorities. The son of Israeli diplomat Eli Gil intentionally ran over a U.S. police officer where Yair Netanyahu resides, Netanyahu's son. The U.S. court ruled that he would not face jail time. Why? Well, because he's going to go serve in the IDF and help kill children. The last part I added, of course, but the reality is that, well, I'm going to go serve in the IDF. So, okay, then we'll just let you go. I mean, what if this is an Israeli? I mean, this is probably the case. He probably is an Israeli American. The point is, what if this is an American who then gets Israeli citizenship, who they allow join the IDF, like a Brian Mast conversation, and then they commit a crime? Can they go flee to the Israeli military? Probably. There's no way in the world this makes sense. This is not the law. This is, I mean, I don't even know what you would call it. And here, Hedy Vertirbo points this out and says the court in the U.S. recently commuted a sentence of an Israeli diplomat's son. Why? Because he's joining the Israeli military. This reveals a lot about U.S. and Israeli legal systems. And he goes over a lot of examples. The Israeli who lives in Florida was convicted of intentionally running over a police officer. He has two previous run-ins with the police. But the 19-year-old in Israel says, I have chosen to serve in the Israeli military. I'm looking forward to the discipline I will learn. Oh, he's clearly been coached. According to the media, he managed to avoid prison in an unusual plea deal. Unusual doesn't sound like the law to me. His statement about serving in the military is what led them to agree to a deal. I wonder whether he even actually served in the military, or if this is just what they said to get away. In Israel, for many years, courts have similarly been commuting the sentences of people who serve in their military service. How does that make sense? Well, it does, because they know what's going on. Clearly, we're seeing it on public display. So all they do is just go join the military. You can do what you want, and we'll remove your crimes. This includes Israelis who assault Palestinians, of course. Multiple examples he highlights. 2017, Israeli settler youths admitted to throwing stones at Palestinian cars, but the court didn't convict them. Small one, but it happens all the time. Why? Because their wish to enlist and serve in the combat unit. It goes on and on. There's so many examples of this, and pretty dark ones, by the way. But to wrap up here, I want to make sure we highlight the fake ceasefire deal, because, yeah, that's actually still going on. I mean, I can't even believe how dumb this is, that they think we can just keep saying the same thing for, 7 months and pretend like this is, I mean, more than that even. It's been going on pretty much since the beginning, but it only got, it got after the short fake pause. That's when this really got focused on, but they were lying all the way through. But it's amazing to me that this is still the argument right here. We just joined POTUS, this is Blinken. With Netanyahu at the White House, the president emphasized the need to close the remaining gaps on the ceasefire. For crying out loud, this is the 26th of July. They've been closing the gaps for 3 months now. If you know the reality, which is that Netanyahu just is sabotaging it, as the Israeli media will tell you. But apparently you're a racist if you say that in this country, despite that being the reality and all. Here's a clip from Jimmy Dore showing you what Trump said. One of the reasons why you might argue that in some level they don't like him here, because he's sort of a wild card. But I still think that's the choice, my opinion, the selection, for many other positive reasons. But here he is. As I'll just read what Jimmy Dore wrote. This is amazing. Watch as Trump says it is not the Palestinians blocking the peace, but Netanyahu that doesn't want to make a deal, which we all know by now. This confirms everyone's suspicion that Netanyahu's plan all along was to wipe out the Palestinians, move those that remained off the land, and take over the West Bank and Gaza. Exactly. But here's Trump on the record, making sure you know what we've been telling you from the beginning.
Here. He wanted to make a deal more than Netanyahu. And I will be honest, I had a great meeting with him, Abbas, right? I had a great meeting with him.
Abbas being the head of the Palestinian Authority, which I do not believe is on the side of Palestinians. But nonetheless, it's about Netanyahu that I think is important.
And we spent a lot of time together, talked about many things. And it was almost like a father. I mean, he was so nice. Couldn't have been nicer. And after meeting with Bibi for 3 minutes, I looked at him and said, you don't want to make a deal, do you? And he said, well, and the fact is, I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make a deal.
Well, guys, he said that publicly. Right, so this is important nonetheless because Trump's saying it will reach certain Republicans, but Netanyahu has been publicly saying that. I'll show you some examples.
Why? I thought the Palestinians were impossible, that the Israelis would do anything to make peace and a deal. I found that not to be true.
Look at that. That's the most important part. That's the 75-year reality. All of these people acting on false information and many not even knowing they're wrong. Guys, my opinion, that sums up Trump's entire administration. Honestly, that should be something you think is positive because that means that Trump didn't realize he was being played, which means he might be fighting for good reasons. I don't really believe that, but at the end of the day, at least in this one example, it shows you that he thought the wrong thing till very recently. So how many times did that false impression manipulate him during his last administration with Pompeo and Bolton pushing very Zionist agendas, right? Think about that. So now he's finding out, well, I thought that Israelis wanted peace and the Palestinians were the ones that didn't. Turns out I was wrong. That's why these things are important. This has been the reality as far back as you can look. Here is this all Rod showing you what Netanyahu brought Trump. A hat that says total victory. You know, because total victory and a peace deal or ceasefire deal are totally the same thing. No, obviously not. Here, again, was the point about Biden and Blinken saying we need to close the gaps of the deal that Netanyahu is publicly saying he'll never allow. It's so stupid what they're doing. They're trying to stretch this out to the election in hopes that they get some kind of fake deal to, you know, it's all about the manipulation of what you think is happening. Here is another clip, which I think is really embarrassing. Patel is constantly, he's gotten a lot worse, I feel, I think he's just less he's not in his element when the point is they're operating from a position where literally everybody knows they're lying. That's hard for anybody. Yeah, this guy's pretty good at this job, I argue. Way better than the KJPs of the world when he's, you know, in a in a position where he is able to give you lies that most people might take. But even saying that, most people are bad at that. But my God, when these people are just watch for yourself. The way that he knows he's caught, and the idea is what he's saying is contradictory to what he just said, and she even calls him out for it. And this has to do with the ceasefire and how they're blocking that deal, which we know, again, because Israeli media is telling you how Netanyahu has systematically foiled talks to release hostages. Plain and simple.
And Hamas has accused Israel of blocking a ceasefire, saying Netanyahu's government has inserted new conditions into the proposal at the latest talks. Is that your assessment as well? And this comes after Netanyahu's visit to D.C., where U.S. officials emphasized the importance of a ceasefire. So are you concerned about the timing?
So I'm not going to get into the specifics of the negotiating process. And
he loves to say that. I'm not going to get into the minutia, the specifics of well, that's your effing job, man. It's not like this is some ongoing investigation or like some normal thing we're used to hearing where you can't get into it. He does this on one side and then will wax intellectual for hours about the other side of it. That's what they all do. And they've been using that excuse pretty well, but she pushes back here.
Certainly not going to negotiate from up here. There are a number of complicated...
No one's asking you to negotiate what's going on. They're asking for basic details, which is what your job is.
Specifics of the negotiating process, and certainly not going to negotiate from up here. There are a number of complicated details that need to be worked out, and I'm not going to outline those publicly, but again, we think a deal is both achievable and we think it's urgent. And
maybe 7 more months of the ceasefire filling gaps, and then maybe we'll get there. I mean, that's the kind of point that makes this real. I don't know why the most average people in the world can't see right through this. Maybe they can. It doesn't take 7 months to piece out a ceasefire, especially when you can see all of his own statements, which say the exact opposite of what a ceasefire by definition means.
As we have said previously and consistently, there has been a deal that was on the table, and Hamas needs to accept that deal. And we expect these conversations to keep on going.
Has Israel...
Despite the numerous times they have where Israel then changes the deal and pushes back and they lie about it over and over and over and over and over and over, and Robert's written about it many times.
To keep on going.
Has Israel inserted new conditions?
Again, I'm just not going to speak to the negotiation process from here.
That's not a negotiation process. That is the reality of the circumstances. And all she's asking for, and the point is it shows you that they know. Well, did Israel add more information like they did last time? I mean, that's what's happening.
Sure, it's just for consistency because
Sure.
you and Matt and other U.S. officials have not hesitated to say when the ball is in Hamas's court. So
right. So just so you understand what she's saying, whenever they get the opportunity, they make sure to tell you that it's in Hamas's responsibility. They're the one we're waiting on. They have to accept. All they're asking before is like, okay, well, is Israel the one holding it up? I can't get into the details. I'm not going to mire myself in the conversation. Well, it's exactly the same thing you say about Hamas. And that's what she asked. Well, whose court is it in now?
I'm just wondering whose court the ball is in now. I mean, U.S. officials last week went to great lengths to stress how much they were dialing up the pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu. The deal is closable. It needs to be closed, subject to some implementation issues. So who is causing the hang-up now?
I'm not going to get into, again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the negotiations, but let's look at this from a little bit of a wider lens and take a step back here. Consistently, since when I believe it was about a month and a half ago when President Biden went into the Roosevelt Room and laid out the contours of this proposal that had been on the table, this proposal that Israel had agreed to, that Arab partners had agreed to, that the United Nations had supported, that the UN Security Council had supported.
You know, the thing that, by the way, we later found out was completely up in the air when they did all of that. It was all a bunch of narratives they spun about how everyone supports the thing. What they supported was the idea of bringing this to the table for them to then negotiate about. But I mean, it's just every step of this has been an utter manipulation.
Time and time again, it continued to be Hamas that changed pieces of the deal and changed pieces of the proposal. So this is a process that is ongoing, and we're going to continue to work through this process. And I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Okay. I mean, you just said Hamas changed the conditions without saying who is changing the conditions now, but I understand we may not get an answer on this. One
caught himself, didn't he? You see? So he before was asked about who is the one doing this. I can't get into specifics. And then in the answer gets into the specifics about how Hamas is the one changing the deal. I mean, it's obvious that that's the same thing, but only one side's allowed to be discussed. Oops. You just effed up, man. You just clearly just demonstrated that your own one-sided. But this is how obvious this all is. Because his mandate is to make sure we're told that Hamas is the one. But then if you're asked about any other side of the dynamic, I can't get into it because that would be too much. Well, that doesn't make sense then. And on top of that, we've shown you 45 times over that Hamas has been very consistent about what they've asked for from the beginning, which is why we've already proven to you, and it's been admitted by Israeli media, that Netanyahu was caught lying about it. That in the beginning, he said Hamas doesn't want a deal. And they were offering it since day one. Since the first week, according to Israeli media, according to any number, 972 magazine, I believe was the one, and plenty of others that have covered this. And including the United Nations and Qatar and Egypt, the ones that are involved. They've offered it from the first week. And Netanyahu just lied about it to the public until eventually it came out to his own people that he was holding off a deal. And they said the deal is secondary, and they lost their minds. Rightly so, because that's their families. And then from there, this whole thing has continued to deteriorate. Oh, and because that's the people that they're using. And that's where this becomes important. Here's the Haaretz again. Netanyahu didn't go to Washington to end the war. He went to get a means to prolong it. It's amazing how the Israeli media just keeps telling you what's going on, and our own government lies to us about it. Now, here are just some older articles. This one's from February 2024. Netanyahu rejects the ceasefire proposal and insists on total victory over Hamas. Read it for yourself. He says that we won't do this until Hamas is gone. Well, pretend how that makes sense with ceasefire. Have a ceasefire with the group that we're going to destroy first. People are so childish about this. Here's the one from May. Netanyahu hoped Hamas would reject the deal. When he didn't, he sabotaged it. I mean, that can't get any more clear. That's exactly what Robert wrote about, but he got called a racist. Well, here's Haaretz saying the same thing. Here is the recent one I just read from October. How Netanyahu has systematically, I don't know why I said, I was just doing it really quickly and looking at it. It's actually, it's weird how they do that, don't they? How they kind of reverse it. But so we're talking about July 10th. It's the backwards. But how Netanyahu has systematically foiled talks to release hostages from Hamas captivity. It's just weird things, by the way, just a quick note about the difference there, or like the metric versus the other. It's always just funny how it seems the U.S. is the standout in all these things, in many ways doing things that are not as accurate. But Netanyahu is foiling these talks. Their people know that. And at my point about secondary, here is the report from CBC News. Defeating Hamas is priority. Everything else is secondary, says Israel. Corporate media. Here is the we are all hostages. This is an Israeli group of hostage families. What are they saying? He uses our family members to build support for himself as he abandons them over and over and over again. That's written by Israeli hostage families. And what they're doing is they're calling out the pin he's wearing for their family members while he's sabotaging the deal to get them back, while bombing the places that they're in, while they're eating pizza and shopping with their torture, rape, dungeon people. Netanyahu is wearing a yellow ribbon on his lapel to support the family's hostages. They're calling him out. Here is a lot more of them. Thousands, if not, I mean, that's a lot of people, participate in a demonstration in Tel Aviv demanding Netanyahu's resignation and an exchange deal with Hamas. They want them to take anything that will bring them back. An end to the war, everything. They've been saying this for months now. You just get lied to by your government, your media. And of course, the very partisan media will lie about it even more. Middle East Eye, Israel has agreed to a hostage exchange and evacuating the Philadelphia Axis, which is the other illegal occupation, before Netanyahu introduced new conditions. Israeli journalist reported. Well, there you go. There's your answer. All right, so here's the Israeli media challenging what he just said to U.S. press, which is Israel introduced new conditions after it had already been exchanged. That's what keeps happening. And it's always about some idea that, well, we have to destroy Hamas first, obviously. Well, then how do you have a ceasefire deal with them? He added that the entire Israeli security apparatus, along with the U.S., are pressuring Netanyahu, but then standing up and lying to the media about it because that's what they always do. It's incredible. So easy to see. Now, one last point about the food, which I want to make sure we saw, because here's Elon Levy still screaming into the dark over here with no one paying attention about the idea of the food. Israel has facilitated, he says, the delivery of 645,000 tons of food into Hamas-run Gaza since they declared the war, which, by the way, is an admission, not a boast. I'll show you why. An independent study found deliveries are more than sufficient for the population. Oh, I'm sure an independent study by Visregard 24 or Kogat, but reality being that you can easily prove from every angle that that's a fraction of what's needed to barely survive. Amidar says, Netanyahu yesterday, there is no hunger in Gaza. That's July 25th. He said this in front of Congress. Elon said the same thing. It's all a hoax. Well, every entity that has any standing in this conversation has been screaming that people are dying from starvation. We can see them. They're gaslighting the world, guys. Well, guess what? You know what 645,000 tons breaks down to? The reality comes down to the idea that about 7,500 tons a day was the pre-war average. Here is the Washington Post. An average, and this is the same point we keep showing you, and this is the same on their snapshot report, that before this current reality, 500 truckloads, including fuel, was the average daily delivery. And that, whatever your thoughts about that, was the reality, and that was barely maintaining food insecurity, according to everybody. So the point is, when they go below that, they're hurting people. Before, 500 trucks would enter each working day, right? The pre-war daily average weight of goods on those 500 trucks was about 7,500 tons. So he just doesn't think you're smart enough, or any of us are smart enough, and maybe because he's not that smart, to break this stuff down. So a little quick math, that breaks down to 86 days. 86 days. What are we at, 250 plus or whatever? I'm not even keeping count anymore. 9+ months. 86 days. So the math that what he is boasting about, 645,000, that's 86 days worth. So he's telling you that they're starving people while pretending that he's giving you more than they need. How many times do I say that? Terrorists are people that do bad things and proudly do it. Worst. Terrible stuff. The worst thing on the planet are people that do those things and then ask for your praise. Ask for you to go, good job, you're helping them, when they're starving children to death. There's a special kind of place in hell for people like Elon Levy and all the rest of them that are doing this, laughing about it, asking for your praise, and then shouting people down as racist for pointing it out. It kills me. And all the numbers are there. He's literally posting it for you. I don't even know if that's accurate. But at the end of the day, what he's telling you they've done is right in front of you. And that breaks down to a fraction of what's needed. And on top of that, here's yet another example from the Human Rights Group. 6-year-old Ali Anas Al-Tater died at the Baptist hospital from malnutrition due to Israeli blockades on northern Gaza. I've lost count, disgustingly enough. Here is the UN page showing you as of the 24th of July. Look at the numbers. How many times I've shown this? The peak of the highest average per day that they've been doing since October 7th was 169 a day. That's it. Down from 500. That's less than half. It's a fraction of what was required to maintain food and security before, and they're telling you they're doing more than ever. They're just flat out lying to you. And the point is, the numbers are down. Look at this dwindling number. All of June, the average was 77 trucks a day, down from 500. Then it was 86 from the 1st to the 21st of July. Now it's down for 42. They're starving these people systematically and laughing about it, and then getting you to pay for it. On top of that, they just blew up a water plant, water station, as Ryan, and then posted the video on their social media, laughing about it. Not a joke, literally, with music in the background. That's it right there, and they set it all up. They set the controlled demolition, which means they're proving on the record that they did not need to do it, because that means they were able to plant them, which means there was not a Hamas presence, no human shield. They did it because they're destroying infrastructure. They're posting it, laughing about it, and your government is paying for it, is gaslighting you away from seeing it. He says, blowing up a water station that serves 1 million plus people. Here's Yunus Tarawi, who's the one that broke the story. Israeli soldiers from the Combat Engineering Corps sharing footage on their own personal accounts of blowing up the Rafah water reservoir, Tel Sultan neighborhood. Guess what? Oh, first, actually, Glenn Greenwald shares the same. And this is Haaretz. Israeli army commanders give the order on Israeli media citing this to blow up the Rafah reservoir. IDF suspects breach of international law. Yeah, that's crazy. Israeli troops with the support of commanders deliberately exploded the main water reservoir. That's not going to be talked about by the corporate media. Guys, this was on the 20th. This is today that he's reporting it, but I believe this was yesterday. No, this is 26th. At least the 26th is being reported. They posted this. So you know how fast these things get into the corporate media when it's something they want to talk about? This is out there. They've seen it. It's covered. It's in mainstream Israeli media. Not a peep in Western media. Not a word from any of the Matt Millers and Kirbys and Patels of the world. There is no possible military justification, Glenn says. It is classic crime against humanity. But guess what? No one's going to do anything about it unless we do something about it. Now, Eunice points out, Rachel Corrie, if you remember her, spent her final month in 2003, defending the well before being crushed alive by an Israeli military bulldozer. 2 decades later, Rafah's main water reservoir is now blown up and shared in now deleted Insta stories by a soldier. 23-year-old peace activist Rachel Corrie is crushed to death by Israeli bulldozer. This is a disgusting story that your government didn't care about. She protested to stop them from doing the same thing they're doing now, and they ran over her in daylight in front of everybody. Murdered her. Nothing happened. It's a sad story. And we're trying to change this, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we're trying to change. I believe we are changing it. And I think that's why this is so incredibly desperate for them. Both your government, wherever you are, the Israeli government, anybody they're influencing. This stuff is, the sad part is that we all can kind of see that this is diminishing. They're losing influence. The world is calling them out, but they're still pushing. They're still murdering. They're still genociding these people. So the question remains, do we have to wait until they destroy everything before we can then find some accountability? God, I hope not. The point is, though, that we can see it, and it is changing, and we cannot allow this to go back the way it was. And that's not possible, in my opinion. But they will desperately try to contort this into something that can continue it in a different way. Our government is just as culpable. They are walking the same line. We, as honest people of the planet, need to stand up against this. This cannot be allowed to continue. As Craig Mokhiber points out, and we'll end with this, for 8 decades, the US, the UK, and Europe have agreed to allow and assist Israel to perpetuate an incremental genocide and ethnic cleansing of the indigenous Palestinian people, and plenty of other locations, by the way. When the new far-right regime took power in January of last year, they shifted to expedited genocide, which causes political difficulties for Western governments. That's what we're seeing on display right now. These governments are now working to return to the more comfortable pace of slow genocide. We must not let them get away with their blood-drenched game. No more settler colonialism, no more apartheid, no more genocide, no more impunity. Hashtag Free Palestine. I think that speaks for itself. God, I just hope that we can actually stop this before it is too late. Speak up. Say something. Talk to people. I know you see it. I know the world sees it. And that's what's so hard about this, is that we're all just kind of, I mean, it's not like we have the power to stop a nuclear armed government. But at the end of the day, every mechanism that exists right now that should be able to do something, I mean, is happening. But yet it just keeps going. So do what you can. I mean, every single voice and every action and every statement and every conversation is making a difference. So thank you for having the courage to do this at a time when it's very difficult, when you're getting more pushback and more detriment. I mean, God, you guys see we're dealing with it too. But we're going to keep pushing because this is important. This is why we do this. I will take 1,000 lawsuits and 1,000 censorships and 1,000 everything else going on to save one of these children, because that's what we're here for. So help us. Thank you for being here. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.